You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast with your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Greetings, Clarkesworld citizens. I hope this podcast finds you extraordinarily well. It's our second story for the month of March 2018, issue 138. This is a really, really long story. I think it's one of the longest we've ever done. So I'm just going to jump right into the story. But first, I just want to thank you if you support the magazine. Your support allows us to bring stories like this. If you're interested, you can go over to clarksworldmagazine.com/donate or patreon.com/clarksworld or clarksworldcitizens.com. Any way you support us is greatly appreciated. So our second story is titled The Persistence of Blood and is by Juliette Wade. Juliette Wade combined a trip to Le Gouffre de Padarac with her academic background in linguistics and anthropology to create the world of Varan, a grand experiment in speculative ethnography. She lives in the Bay Area of California with her husband and 2 children who support and inspire her. Her fiction has appeared in Clarkesworld Analog and fantasy and science fiction. She runs the Dive into World-Building video series and workshop at patreon.com/Juliette Wade. You can find more at her website, talktoyouniverse.blogspot.com. And if you like what you hear, she's had 3 other stories here in Clarkesworld. March 2014 brought you Steta Mona Diwanai, Not Easily Thrown Away. July 2014 brought you Soul's Bargain. And April 2017 brought you Sunwake and the Lands of Teeth. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a really long one, coming in around 26,000 words. So without further ado, I want you to sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Beneath her squirming 2-year-old, beneath her rustling gown, Salome could feel herself bleeding. It had started an hour ago. A subtle trick of guilt, and, like a trickle of falling dust at the border of the city caverns, it warned that the way forward was dangerous. Salome squeezed Pelli tighter. Her daughter squeaked protest, so she released a little, nuzzled down between Pelli's puffed curls, and inhaled the sweet scent of kala oil where her hair parted. She risked a glance down the brass dinner table at her partner, Zarif. Zarif sat deep in conversation with their elder son, the fingers on one pale hand buried in his silver hair, while their younger son listened raptly. Seeming to sense her glance, Zarif looked up, and his lips curved into a smile. She knew those fingers, those lips. A lick of heat, the memory of pleasure. And then the fear struck her in the stomach, as unspeakable as the blood. Oh, Holy Heil, in your mercy, preserve my health, keep my senses intact. Salome hid the tremors of her hands by rubbing them into Pelli's back. With a giggle, Pelli started kissing her cheeks. Salome managed to return a few kisses, then tried to pull away by looking up at the electric chandelier that hung from the vaulted ceiling. 8-year-old Avon tucked at her left hand, playing with the ruby drops dangling from her bracelet. "Can I wear your bracelet, Mother?" Caught in the breath of doom, she couldn't bear to make Avon frown. "Not now, but someday, all right?" Avon circled her wrist with her thin fingers, golden like Salome's own, and sighed. "It's so pretty." Not the word she would have used. The rubies looked like drops of blood. She had no doubt what Zarif had meant by them. Blood is precious. When she'd first begun her bleeding, Mother had taught her the same. In this age of decline, the noble blood of the global race was not to be wasted. Well, she hadn't wasted it. 7 pregnancies in 20 years of partnership with Zarif. 5 live births, 4 of the children perfectly normal. And while Pelli's albinism might be recessive, it could do little harm here in the city caverns. Their beautiful, brave Enziel had just partnered into the 8th family to great acclaim, Meanwhile, however, the decline continued, and no success was ever enough. Even success paid for in blood. Another trickle made her want to scream. "Off you go now," she said instead, lowering Pelly's feet to the floor. The girl ran to her nurse escort and patted the leg of his black silk suit. The escort frowned, his embati, caste-marked, tattooed, furrowed between his brows. "Pelly," Salome scolded. "We don't touch the embati. Are you a big girl?" "Big girl." Pelly lifted her white hands away and wrung them over her head contritely. "Big girl." "And who are a big girl's hands for?" "Pelly." "Ask if you want your Vered to hold you." Pelly's lips trembled, but she managed. Please?" "Of course, young mistress," the escort replied. He swooped her up in a twirl that turned the threatening tears into a cry of joy and carried her from the dining room. Salome sighed. Pelly was so big now. Perhaps if she'd been smaller, more dependent on the breast, this doom could have been postponed. To Avon, she said, "Time to get ready for bed, darling." Avon's escort caught her glance and passed it to the other embati of the household, who quickly withdrew. At last, even her sons, Brinks and Coram, came to kiss her and excuse themselves into their shared rooms. She had to speak now while the blood could still protect her. She turned toward Zareth at the head of the table, but fear twined up into her throat. Zareth gave her an uncertain smile. Zareth's embati woman moved, noticeable now as she left her station behind his shoulder. Embati Ustin, tall, broad-shouldered, and muscular, with her hair in several long braids that looked almost white against her tailored blacks, easily pulled out one of the brass chairs that stood empty between them. Zareth stood up, still smiling, and moved to the new seat. Then Salome's own manservant, Greavy, pulled out the chair beside his. Oh, to be close to him again. She couldn't move. If she got close, they would kiss. If they kissed, they would make love. If they made love, she would get pregnant again. And even if she managed not to lose the pregnancy, there would be labor and pain. Not just pain, but pain like with Pelly. The screaming, the blank darkness. She'd wake up feeling like someone had dismembered her, her left leg dead to the hip, and this time maybe her right, too. Maybe this time she wouldn't regain her ability to walk. Or maybe this time she wouldn't wake up at all. "Zareth, I can't," she blurted. "Salome?" She stared down at her hands clutched in her lap at the beautiful bracelet. The ruby drops looked dark in the shadow of the silk tablecloth. "I know your blood is precious. I know my duty to the race, but I just can't anymore." The guilt sharpened when spoken aloud. She tried not to imagine what words might come from his mouth in reply. Perverse, selfish, unworthy. Zareth cleared his throat. "Salome." Something touched her shoulder. Oh, mercy, that was his hand. Her whole body clenched in on itself, hardened. Her chest felt like a geode, unable to admit breath, crusted inside with fear. Zareth pulled his hand away. "Oh, Salome, my jewel, my life's partner, my blessed maiden, I'm sorry." She shook her head, tried to breathe. "Greavy," said Zareth. "She all right?" The embati made no answer. She could hear Zareth stand, pace the length of the table, but if she tried to respond, she'd only moan or scream. Abruptly, he left through the bronze door to the sitting room. She could hear him out there murmuring to his Ustin. "Mistress," Greavy said in his deep, soft voice, "I have vowed to protect you." Her Greavy had helped her more in her recoveries than anyone, but could she really ask him to protect her from Zareth? Was that even possible? Would it mean she could never kiss Zareth again, never feel his arms around her? Did she really want such protection? She sipped a small breath. I understand, Griffy. Thank you. Then Zareth came in. Salome snapped her jaw shut. My Salome. Zareth's voice was husky, vibrating at the edge of control. He knelt beside her feet on the silk carpet. Oh, Elinda, help me. Sure he wouldn't demand to have her while she still bled. His breath grated. Ustin said, you've... Nash it, Salome, this is my fault. What? She frowned. It's my fault. When Pelly was born, I don't know what I should have done. How could I listen to you scream and do nothing? I asked the doctors, but I only thought they would take away your pain, not that they'd... He dragged a breath. You went quiet so suddenly. I thought Mother Elinda had plucked your soul away, and my own heart too, and then, when you woke, damaged. And it was my fault. She whispered, but you didn't do anything. Zareth shook his head. He grasped her hand, his fingers pale against her golden skin, and lifted it until her bracelet sparkled in the light. I didn't give this to you because blood is precious, Salome. I gave it to you because your blood is precious. You are precious. I don't care what the family council says. The race doesn't deserve your life. She managed to look at him, his gray eyes shining with emotion, his silver hair falling to his shoulders. Age had given him creases around his eyes as it had given him more substance. It had also granted him more dignity and determination, and more influence. He often reminded their boys that as the first family's representative on the cabinet, he had the eminence's ear. Yet he would put her first. Zareth, she whispered. Thank you. Her chest opened slowly. What would happen now? Was there a way forward over cracked, uncertain stone? Zareth leaned close to her cheek for a kiss that barely touched her, the same kind of careful innocence he'd used when they'd first become partners, to soften the age difference between them. He cleared his throat. My Ustin tells me that in the last couple of months you've been missing your friend, Tamalera, he said. When she frowned in bafflement at the change of subject, he added, Gar's partner, who moved away with him to Salemna. She couldn't stop a smile at that. Dear, I know who Tamalera is. I sent her a radiogram last week. Zareth chuckled nervously. Of course you do. Salome humored him. Your Ustin deserves credit for turning her powers of observation to ladies' concerns. I do miss Tamalera. I could talk to her. We could play quadros together, and derelai, and we'd talk. Zareth laid a hand against his chest. I could... Would you like me to talk to you? Don't we talk? A blush turned his pale chink's peak. Well, we do. Though never before about the terrible things, the real things. Maybe you could tell me what you and Brinks were talking about? Zareth smiled. You can be proud of him. He's really getting to know the workings of the cabinet. Cousin Fedron likes working with him. I saw how Coram listens, she said. I'd say he already knows more than you expect him to. Zareth nodded. I can't believe he's almost 12. Salome gulped. Coram's 12th birthday would make him eligible for heir selection if the worst occurred. Mercy of Heil, she said. Is the Eminence Indal unwell? Oh, no, Zareth waved his hands. I mean, he's... Well, of course he is. I'm sorry I scared you. I didn't mean to. He sighed. This wasn't how I thought this should work. Salome sighed too. She and Tamalera had talked of anything everything, deliberately avoiding any discussion of their duties to the race. But when had she and Zarif last spoken of anything but family? She tried to think of something else. Anything else. Her mind was as empty as an abandoned cave pocket. I love you. I love you too, my Salome. He sounded awfully disappointed. Sir, said Mbati Iston, quietly behind his left shoulder, I believe you enjoy a game of quadros? Now, hope lit his eyes. Salome, shall we play? He offered his arm. She had been walking with more courage recently, with less worry that her left hip might fail unexpectedly. She still stood slowly and walked slowly, but it felt good not to have to grasp Zarif's arm too hard. In the sitting room, someone, Ustin, most likely, had already moved the quadro set from its pedestal in the corner onto the slate-topped table between the couches. Salome sat, arranged her silk skirts, and fell into anticipating potential moves for the long-haired warriors wrought in gold, who brandished antique weapons upon their posts at the grid intersections. Zarif turned the marble board so she had the emerald-helmed warriors, and he the sapphire. He opened his hands to her. You go first. She nodded. They played in silence, but when she executed her first entrapment, he glanced up at her. Have you always been this good at quadros? How is it we'd never played before? She shrugged. I played with Tamalera. She took a deep breath. Zarif, about what we talked about, are you sure you won't, or we won't? We won't, I promise. But what should I tell people when they ask? They'll ask, he sighed. Of course they'll ask. Say we've decided not to. She raised eyebrows at him. They'll blame me, and think I've insulted you, and that I've lost my mind. Then say it's just not working. They'll think I'm sick. The family council would investigate. Then say it's my fault. He frowned, shaking his head. Not that I've rejected you, but that my health is to blame. Your health? You mean put your cabinet position at risk? At that moment, a wisp entered through the stone arches of the ceiling, a tiny golden spark of light that spiraled down between them, casting a burst of warrior shadows, then disappearing through the marble game board and table and into the floor. Wisps are good luck, Zarif said. Maybe no one will ask you. Salome sighed. Let's play. Nobody could be that lucky. Salome put her hands on her hips, feeling uncomfortably like her own mother. Before her on the bed, Pelly frowned stubbornly down at her own small, nightgown-clad body, a too familiar defiance. Nap first, big girl, Salome said. Your cousin's party doesn't even start for hours. Mama party. I'm not going. Your father will take you with Coram and Avon. Staying home was the only way to be safe from questions, though writing letters while her entire family helped celebrate a cousin's confirmation seemed, unfair. She blew out a breath. Pelly scowled. Salome sat beside her. I love you, Pelly. I promise you can go out, just lie down a bit first. Excuse me, mistress? Pelly's Vered said softly. She waved him off. I'll take care of it. Please take a break, Vered. The Mbati bowed stiffly and withdrew through a door hidden behind a curtain. Her grievy remained. When Salome turned back to Pelly, her daughter's lip was trembling dangerously. Pelly, it's all right. Come here. I love you. She held the girl's head against her shoulder and rocked her. Time for sleeping. Just a bit of sleeping. Nothing to do now. Nothing. Mama's doing nothing. Not going anywhere. Nap time for Pelly. Mama loves her Pelly. She leaned over to deposit Pelly into bed, but Pelly clung, and Salome had to catch herself with her elbow before she squished her accidentally. Let go, big girl. Pelly squirmed and whined. Here, I'll lie down with you. It was difficult, because Pelly still wouldn't let go, and her left hip twinged as she shifted to straighten it, and her gown hitched up above her knees. She grunted, but she'd often told Greavy she'd rather manage such awkwardness without his help, at least when she was alone. There, she kissed Pelly's warm cheek. Sleepy Mama, sleepy Pelly. Pelly sat up. Salome tightened her arm across her daughter's lap. Lie down, Pelly. Pelly party. Oh, nash it. You won't go to the party at all if you don't sleep. Looking up at her from an awkward position on the bed did not convey authority, and her leg was aching, and she didn't want to help. Looking up at her from an awkward position on the bed did not convey authority, and her leg was aching, and she didn't want help. Pelly, you will lie down right now because I told you so. No! You are a little girl, and little girls do as they're told. No! Nash it, I'm your mother, and I know what's best for you. If you don't think of your health, you'll ruin your value to the race. Pelly started bawling. Lie down. Salome heaved up on one elbow and pulled her down. Pelly thrashed. Her head hit Salome in the cheekbone. Her knee jabbed her in the stomach. Nash it. Nash it! Grunting, Salome struggled to grab the flailing limbs. Finally, she managed to pin part of the bedsheet under her own body and wrap the rest of it over Pelly. To catch the hand that was hitting her in the head, and tuck it under, to pin the sheet down with one hand on Pelly's other side. Pelly roared with rage. Panting, Salome held her there until fatigue drained the note of anger from Pelly's cries, and she hiccuped to a stop. Hitching breaths, but finally, sleeping breaths. Salome carefully let go, even more carefully pulled her arm back. Ow. She collapsed face down on the bed, breathed hard, aching everywhere. Her left leg twitched and twinged. Why did I do that? I wasn't going to do that again, not to Pelly. I should have let Verid handle this, even if it was embodied coddling. She turned her head and touched her lips to Pelly's wet cheek. A hint of salt crept between them. She's too much like me. Salome sighed, her head back down on the bed, and closed her eyes. It was easier just to lie here, not to try to move, just to imagine herself sinking through the mattress toward the stone floor. Curtains rustled, and a quiet change came to the air of the bedroom. A servant coming in, maybe Pelly's Verid. A long silence pulled Salome toward sleep. Greavy whispered tensely, "We don't need your interference." Another long silence followed, but Salome was fully awake now. Greavy whispered tensely, "We don't need your interference." Another long silence followed, but Salome was fully awake now. Greavy whispered again, "Gentlemen's servants should stick to politics. They always think everything is their business. I'm charged to safeguard her health." And a higher voice answered, "But her health is politics. You know that." Ustin's voice? What was Ustin doing here without Seraph? She shouldn't let them talk about her in her presence, but she'd never heard servants speak like this, and it was so hard to move. To interrupt Greavy in the midst of more emotion than she had ever heard an embody express aloud, it seemed cruel. "I took the mark in her name," Greavy said. "My vow of service binds us two alone. Will you compromise that with your selfishness?" "Such a question," Ustin said, her voice level, disapproving. "I don't know." "You may be excused, Ustin," said Greavy. A swish of curtains suggested Ustin was making a swift departure. Salome carefully waited more than a minute, then shifted her head and moaned as if she'd just awakened. "Greavy?" He helped her to turn over. She sneaked a glance at his face, his broad forehead illustrated with the manservant's lily crest mark. but he wore the same patient, agreeable expression as always. It felt dishonest not to mention what she'd overheard, but she bumped up against the embodied secrets before, and heard that very same toneless, "I don't know." If she brought it up, she'd only mortify him to no purpose. Guilty, she lay on her back and stared at the ceiling vault, with Pelly's head tucked underneath her right arm. In her sleep, Pelly turned, and her face pressed into the side of Salome's breast. Salome fell into a doze, but woke again when the small, warm hand found its sleepy way onto her belly. She patted it gently. "Mama," Pelly murmured. "Sweet Pelly, I'm glad you had a sleep." Pelly wriggled herself into a ball, bottom in the air, then lifted her head and placed it beside her hand so all Salome could see was the fuzz of orange hair. Maybe she could hear tummy gurgles in there. "Am I your pillow, big girl?" Salome asked. "Baby tummy," said Pelly. "Yes, you were in there once." "Pelly sissy?" Pelly turned her head, pale eyes wide. "Baby more?" Hurt, incredulity, indignation flashed her skin hot, but it wasn't Pelly's fault. No babies in there," Salome answered. Slowly she sat up and gathered Pelly onto her lap. "Now, how about we get dressed and go to your cousin's party?" "Mama party?" "Yes. I think we should all go together." No place was safe from questions. Even with the help of their embody, they were not among the first to arrive. The noise of chattering guests already filtered through their host's velvet curtains into the vestibule, where the first houseman greeted them. No sooner had their arrival been announced when the 6-year-old guest of honor burst through the curtain and barreled into Avon, Coram, and Pelly, shouting, "I'm real! I'm real! I'm real! I'm real!" Salome caught Avon with one hand before she could be entirely bowled over. With the other, she gripped tightly into Embody Greavy's supporting arm. "Gently, Pyras." "Of course you're real, young Pyras." Zareth chuckled and ruffled the little boy's dark hair. "Congratulations on your birthday." "I'm real." Pyrdus's waving arm had an odd smudge of red on it. "What are you saying?" asked Avon. "What's on your arm, blood?" "I'm not going to die like my mother," Pyrdus crowned. "I've been stamped. I'm real." "Pyrdus, will you cut it out?" said Coram, trying to avoid being pummeled. Pelly jumped up and down and joined in the shouting. "Real! Real! Real!" "Go play," said Salome, and gave them a shove as the first houseman pulled the curtain aside. "Coram, if you want quiet, look for Tagaret and your older cousins in the private areas of the suite." Pyrdus and Pelly ran off together hand in hand. Coram and Avon more slowly followed. Salome shot a glance of sympathy at Administrator Vol, Pyrdus's father, who stood waiting to greet them. "Sorry about that," Vol said, flashed in embarrassment. "Our doctor has a sense of humor." She stamped Pyrdus as well as the confirmation papers. "We're just so glad to see him happy," Salome replied soothingly. "I'm sorry you missed the big announcement." "The Pellis Maris Society welcomes him," said Zareth. "The race will benefit greatly from his life and health." Vol's face stilled a moment. He and his partner, Lady Indelis, had been seen as one of the race's great hopes until her death 3 years ago. Salome sent thanks to Mother Alinda for placing her soul among the stars. "Come, Vol," said Zareth. "Let's go further in. I see some people I'd like to talk to." Salome squeezed her Greavy's hand in preparation to walk in, but he rumbled, "Mistress, the public rooms are too crowded. Visiting members of the household have been invited into the servants' maze." She held tighter. "Not yet, Greavy, please. Help me to where I can sit." "Yes, mistress." She could have walked the distance by herself, probably, but navigating among gentlemen, fast-moving children, and the wide skirts of ladies was much easier with Greavy's support. He settled her into a spot on one of the sitting room's purple couches, then withdrew behind a nearby curtain. He'd hear her through the service speakers if she called. Half a breath later, a rustle of young ladies found her. "Salome, it's been too long." That was Lady Kier, who had often joined her for a game of cards with Temalera. Her golden skin was flushed and her dark eyes a little too bright, though Salome had never known her to drink. "Are you?" She leaned forward confidently, braids swinging around her face. "Well, I mean, any news?" Salome reached a hand toward her and pretended the question was only an idle inquiry about her well-being. "No particular news, Kier. I'm quite well, and you?" Kier giggled. I'm well. Such an auspicious day, you know. I wouldn't have missed it." Suddenly she seized Salome's hand, looking furtively around the room. "You must help me. I haven't yet managed to get pregnant. Eric's is very patient about it, but I'm dying to... Oh, just look at the darling children. It just makes me so jealous." "May Elinda bless you, dear," Salome said. "And may Heil keep you in health. By the way, I suppose you've met my friends? They would love to have your blessing, too?" Salome did know the friends, who were only new to Care because she had partnered late and moved from third family to first just this year. She squeezed all their hands and blessed them, though it hurt her heart. Care was the oldest of the four at 20, and the only one without a history of pregnancy. None had yet borne a confirmed child. "I can't believe this party," one of them muttered. "Piaris is 6. He's been healthy as an artisan since the day he was born. It's showing off, that's what it is." Salome looked over too late to see who had spoken, but she wasn't about to allow the guest of honor to be impugned by comparison to a lower. "Don't you remember, cousins? They all had this party all planned 3 years ago," she said, "when Lady Indelis miscarried." Her words created an instant of excruciating silence. Everyone knew how that ended. "I'm hungry," Lady Kier announced suddenly. "Anyone want some of those delicious mushroom tarts?" She walked away quickly, the others fluttering and murmuring behind her. Salome sighed. Her temper wasn't steady today. Maybe she should have stayed home. She stared at the purple piping at the edge of the couch, avoiding people's eyes. "Salome, my love?" A warm touch on her shoulder. "Zarif." She took the hand he offered and stood with relief. "Are we leaving?" Zarif frowned. "So soon? I wasn't thinking to, I admit, but I couldn't leave you looking so troubled." His face was rueful. "Walk with me. I've been speaking with the First Family Council." "All right. Let's not hurry." She felt quite steady on his arm, walking through the cast bronze door into the dining room. Most of the men had gathered here, standing about in jewel-colored velvet suits and raising celebratory glasses of sparkling yesel. She only recognized 3. Their host, Vul, wore aquamarine, while Zarif's colleague from the cabinet, Fedron, wore emerald. The third man she recognized was Eric's, Lady Kier's partner, who wore topaz. He had pale skin and clubbed fingertips, and kept his Embati woman near him, even when all the others had stepped out. "Eric's was just telling me he's been promoted," Zarif told her. "Arbiter of the First Family Council." "Congratulations," said Salome. Eric's bowed graciously. "A pleasure to see you, lady. In fact, you are a paragon among us, an honor to your gifts to the race." "Good to see you, Eric's," she said. "I believe the arbiter position will benefit greatly from your kindness. You're welcome to seek out my children any time to see how they're doing." "Let's not forget your organizational skills," added Zarif. "It's a heavy responsibility to monitor the health and continuance of the First Family. I'm sure you'll do well." "To all our benefit," Salome agreed. "Is it too early to ask you, Arbiter, how you assess the prospects of the First Family's next generation?" Eric's smiled. In fact, it is not too early at all. I confirmed a new partnership arrangement just this morning. In fact, it's doing quite well." He blushed. "We're all giving it our best efforts, aren't we?" Today, in this home, the platitude was insulting. "Indeed we are," she said, "though some of us are giving our efforts, while others are giving up our health, and others, like Lady Indelis, have given their lives." Vol looked stricken. Erix laid one hand on his chest, and Fedron exclaimed, "Lady!" "Am I wrong?" she demanded. "For the good of a boy like Pyaris, at least, I imagined you could think of some way to protect our mothers better. Aren't you all men of importance?" "Lady, you have no idea how—" Fedron began, but Zareth grabbed his arm. "Excuse me," said Salome. She turned away too quickly, and her left leg twinged. She shifted to her right. She stepped again, and the leg didn't buckle, but suddenly she was wobbling and couldn't seem to correct it. Worse, by now she was out the door, where the only things to grab onto were random party guests. She hopped on her right foot and managed to stop in an utterly undignified manner. Out of nowhere, a pair of hands steadied her. Strong, wiry hands attached to arms on pale gray sleeves. A pale gray coat marked the cartoonin caste. Salome looked up and found she'd been rescued by the confirming doctor. The tall woman had painted her face, as only the cartoonin did. She had black lines on her eyelids and light green on her lower lip. Her coat flared to her knees, and was finely embroidered with designs in the same light gray. "Thank you, cartoonin," Salome said. "Please excuse my imposition, lady," but the cartoonin didn't immediately let go. "I'm all right," Salome insisted. "I can stand." "Yes, lady." The doctor folded her arms, tapped her fingers, took a breath as if to speak, but let it out silently. "Thank you for being here," Salome said. "You made Pyaris very happy with that stamp." "He's worth the trip, lady," said the doctor. "I'd take 6 of him over anyone else here." Her half-green smile pulled sideways. "Except maybe that poor, desperate girl." "What do you mean?" "Nothing, really. If you'll permit, lady, I'd prefer to talk about you. Have you had therapy for that leg?" She shouldn't have been surprised. Cartoonin's specialized education made them audacious. "Of course," she explained. "My Greavy and I worked on it. He helped me immensely." The doctor nodded. "I believe you should consider finding a proper cartoonin therapist. With respect, women's embody receive quality medical training, but sometimes they can be too close to you to see things clearly." How should she respond to that? Was that presumption? For a doctor to speak that way of a hire like Greavy? But what if she was right? "How long has it been since your injury?" the doctor asked. 2 years? The doctor lowered her voice. "Pardon, but if it were me, I'd try not to get pregnant until I had it looked at." Now that was most definitely presumption. "Oh, it's that simple then, is it?" Salome snapped. People in the crowd around them turned to look. The doctor bowed formally and spoke toward the floor. "My sincere apologies, lady." The urge to have her thrown out lasted only a split second, replaced by perverse curiosity. This doctor could answer questions. Salome gathered her composure and smiled, her heart pounding. "Well, that's all right, of course, doctor," she said. "No trouble at all." Deliberately, Salome looked away toward a wisp that had drifted in. The bright spark was no larger than her smallest fingernail, and moved aimlessly, caught in the wake of one person's movement, then another's, casting twinkles through the gathering. Younger children pointed and grinned at it, while the older ones mimicked the adults' casual ignorance. Salome waited until nearby conversations gradually resumed. The doctor still watched her warily and threaded a strand of red hair back behind one ear. When it seemed safe enough, Salome stepped closer. "Doctor," she whispered, "is it that simple for—" She almost said for lowers, but stopped herself. For someone like you?" The doctor gritted her teeth. "Will you have me punished, lady?" "Certainly not. May my strike me." "There are many ways, but Here are 3, the doctor said and counted on her long fingers. 1. Exemerin. 2. Ambnil. 3. Swear off men. Her eyes flitted briefly across the crowd and she smirked, easier for some than others. Thank you, Kartunen. Everyone! A voice shouted. A series of quick claps cut through the murmur of conversations. Everyone, we have an announcement. Salome turned. The men from the dining room were emerging, Vol and Zarif in the lead. I'd like to thank Vol for hosting us on such an auspicious occasion, Zarif said. A healthy boy joins us in the Pelismara Society with his proud father looking on. But in my heart I can't help but wonder, and perhaps you have, too, my cousins, how much more auspicious would this day be if Lady Indelis could be here? A sigh swayed the crowd. Vol nodded, pressed a fist over his mouth. Too many mothers give their lives in the name of the race, said Zarif. The first family could go stronger and happier if they were still with us. That's why Fedron and I will be bringing a new proposal to the Eminence in the name of Lady Indelis. Our proposal will allow women whose lives have been endangered in childbirth to retire from their duties to the race and dedicate themselves to the upbringing of their families. We appreciate your support. The crowd broke into murmurs, some shocked, but it seemed some approving. Zarif made his way to her side and took her arm. Are you ready to go home, my love? Yes, please. Just look at the childlike mischief in his eyes. She managed to suppress a grin, but couldn't help glancing at him over and over. When they passed the Wisp on their way to the private rooms to gather their children and servants, it seemed similarly attracted by his energy. It swirled around and through his coattails, not drifting off until they'd left the party, and started down the hall toward home. As soon as no one was looking, Salome's grin escaped to her face. Me, legally retired. Zarif. Of course, it was always challenging to get the children settled after the excitement of a party. Salome kissed Coram goodnight, fingering a lock of his hair. Now that he was 11, he professed himself too old for such intimacies. But she'd get away with it as long as she was able. Such soft, soft curls. The perfect cross between Zarif's straight hair and her own. Mother? Coram turned his head, pulling the curl from her grasp. Has Father made a lot of laws? She frowned. I think so. Which ones? He's participated in votes for all of them. I'm not sure how many times he's proposed his own. You should ask him. Do you think the Eminence Indal will like this new one? She should have known he'd hear. Rumors were as swift and unquenchable as wisp fire. I hope so. When is Brinks coming home? Salome glanced to the other brass-framed bed, which the household had perfectly arranged with sheets turned back for whenever her eldest returned from his evening with friends. Late, sweet boy. Please don't wait up. Coram grunted, but when she leaned down to him, accepted a kiss. Mistress, came a disembodied voice from behind the servants' curtain. Please, mistress, if you would attend your daughter. Oh, no. I could have sworn Pelly was sleeping like a stone. I'm on my way. Salome walked on her Grievy's arm into the hallway, and together they hurried to the girl's room. He pulled open the heavy bronze door for her. Mercy. Pelly was sleeping like a stone, arms and legs flung wide, her covers tossed off and her pillow on the floor. The muffled sobs came from the other bed. Avon? Salome whispered. Avon sat bolt upright, still sobbing, and reached for her with both hands. Salome limped to her bed and sat down. Avon's hands clutched hard enough to hurt, and she wormed into Salome's lap. Avon, my sweet Avon, what in the name of mercy? Salome murmured, stroking her back. I'm here. Everything's all right, I promise. What's wrong? Avon sobbed something into her shoulder. I don't understand. Mama, you almost died. Mercy indeed. She's so smart. For a second it hurt to swallow. My darling, she managed. That was about Lady Indelis. Avon pulled back and scowled, sobs turned to outrage. No, it wasn't. All right, I'm sorry. You're right. She found Avon's hands and gave them a tug. But I didn't die. By Elinda's forbearance, I am here now, sweet one, and I love you. It's not fair. Avon's arms lifted from her waist to drape over her shoulders, and the girl nuzzled into the crook of her neck. Why do we have the decline anyway when lowers don't? I don't know, love. Every parent faced this moment. Somehow it never got any easier, even after going through it with each of her older children. I guess we have to remember that each of us has our time. We can take good care of ourselves, but we don't get to choose. Some people are never born, some are never confirmed and live hidden. Some are here one day and gone the next. My mother used to tell me that Mother Elinda loves the race the most of all the people of Erin, and puts us in special constellations. That makes no sense. Even her daughter's voice was frowning. Mother Elinda puts souls into us. She doesn't just take them out. If she really loved us, she'd give us babies to end the decline, not kill us. Sweet one. And how do we know the people who die are in the sky anyway? It's the sky. She waved an arm toward the vaulted stone ceiling. Salome could feel all 4 levels of city and rock above. Only travelers, Venerai farmers, and Arisen firefighters ever saw the sky. It was long way up to the gods her mother had wanted her to believe in. I suppose we don't know, she sighed. But we do have Imbati and Kartunen who care for our health. And if your father passes his law, then fewer of us will die. Avon shook her head. Mama. Please, darling, don't worry. Come here. She pulled Avon in again and leaned against her springy hair. Across the room, Pelly sneezed in her sleep and turned over, apparently unaware. Could they be saved? And what about her firstborn daughter, Anziel, whose trials were already beginning? A click came from the door latch. Salome looked up. This was Zareth, sticking his head in. What did he want? She raised eyebrows at him. Zareth didn't call for her, but came in and sat with them on the bed. She had no idea what he intended until he wrapped his arms around both of them. After a moment's surprise, she relaxed into his shoulder. Avon, too, seemed comforted. When at last Avon began to nod off, Salome nudged Zareth until he stood, then returned her daughter's head to the pillow and tucked her in. Zareth offered her a hand up. She took his arm and walked with him slowly out the door. In the hall, the light of the sconce fell across his features. Untouched by Avon's fear of death, he looked quite as delighted as he had at the party this afternoon. Her own excitement welled up again. She seized his hands between hers. Zareth, thank you, she said. What this means to me, I can't. She pressed his hands to her heart, then to her lips. They unfolded warm and soft to cup her cheeks. Zareth bent close to her. I had to do it. She turned her face up and kissed him. How could she not? His lips were so sweet, and it had been so long. His mouth opened into a whole world where they existed only for each other. She tried to put her body and soul into that sacred place, and only when she gulped a breath did she realize she was already undressing him in her mind, while he pressed against her, eager and proud with the desire that had never dimmed. The desire that could kill her, if it were fully satisfied. She pushed him away, gasping. I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't mean to. Go away, she cried. By Sirin and Ain, please. His face full of pain, Zareth staggered away and vanished into the master bedroom. All the inner parts of her tugged after him, but Salome did not follow. Naturally, rumors about Zaref's proposal were everywhere. Salome had to discover a new talent, extinguishing conversations faster than atmospheric lamps at nightfall. No question in her mind what the talk was about. However, she'd prefer to know how far the information had changed, and how those changes might reflect on the first family. There was only one possible course of action. Any lady of intelligence developed tools for unlocking the truth. Today was a day to employ her favorites. Soothe the spirit with tea, amuse the tongue with cakes, and tease the honesty out. The household had already completed arrangements in the sitting room. White silk cloth over the slate-topped table, silver spoons, teacups of silver-rimmed glass. Considering the delicacy of the topic, Salome had chosen to invite one friend from the 9th family and one from the 11th, both family allies. Now all she needed— "Excuse the interruption, mistress," the first houseman said, stepping from behind his curtain, "but your cousin, Lady Care, wishes to speak with you." Now? Salome pressed a knuckle to her lips. Should I turn her away? Or let her see preparations meant for others? I'll come to her, she decided. On Greevy's arm, she walked to the vestibule, where she ducked around the edge of the velvet curtain. Kier stood waiting, twisting her golden hands even more tightly than the twists her Mbati woman had made in her hair. "Cousin," said Salome, "are you all right?" "Is it really true," Kier asked, "about what Zaref is planning?" What had she heard? 1 hour later, it might have been easier to answer. Only what he announced at Pyaras's party. But that's awful." "Awful? What do you mean?" Kier wrung her hands. "Well, do you think it's fair? That we have to almost die before we can get out of it? And what does that even mean, almost?" "What, get out of it before you've even started?" Shock stole her ability to speak the words. A good thing, too, because behind that automatic protest loomed an intimate recognition as terrifying as a glimpse of sunlight. Salome swallowed hard. "Oh, Kier, cousin." She took a deep breath. "How difficult it must have been to come to me with your thoughts. Thank you for trusting me." She opened her arms, and Kier embraced her. Salome resisted the urge to stroke her like a child. "I know how difficult this is. I can't imagine what you've heard out there." Kier sighed, but unfortunately didn't give any hint of what she'd heard. Salome drew another steadying breath. "So, I'm thinking, today, in a few minutes, I'll be speaking with some friends about this. If you've no prior commitments, then perhaps you would like to join us?" "Oh," Kier pulled back, dabbing her cheeks with her fingers. "I'd love to. Which friends? Do I look like I've been crying?" "No, please, don't worry about that. I'm expecting Lady Ryo of the 9th family. She's always been a great comfort to me during my recoveries, and you know Lady Lien of the 11th family from our games of Derelai." "Does Lady Ryo play?" Care asked. "Since we're missing a 4th? Well, not today, all right. You may freshen up in my rooms as you like. The others will be here in a moment." Kier bustled off at once. Her long-haired manservant stayed behind. "Mbati?" "Your pardon, lady." The embodied curtsied, inclining her tattooed forehead. "Your generosity in this invitation is much appreciated, but I must express concern." "About Kier?" She leaned her head to one side. "My mistress decided to visit you because she is deeply moved by this topic. I fear that in conversation she may become impassioned, even in the presence of outsiders." "And possibly risk family secrets." Salome nodded. "I understand. I'm already planning to tread carefully. I'll protect her, I promise." The servant bowed and followed her mistress deeper into the suite. Salome sent her Greevy to the dining room to speak with the household keeper about how to accommodate an additional guest. He'd only just stepped away when the doorbell rang again. The first houseman emerged from the vestibule, seeming perturbed to find her unattended. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Mistress, your other guests have arrived, but they've brought a companion. Lady Tifi of the second family. Salome frowned. This could not be coincidence, and it would be rude to confront the motive of an unexpected guest. If she pushed ahead in her own inquiries, was rockfall inevitable? To protect Kier, she should give up on her questions altogether? "They are all welcome," she said. She took a deep breath, weighing the words tell, inform, and alert for how far to mobilize the household. Best to be cautious. "Please alert the household to the change of plan." "Yes, mistress." Greavy returned swiftly, apologizing for his absence at a critical moment. Salome reassured him and allowed him to escort her to her seat. She kept sharp eyes on her guests as they entered. Lady Raya wore a smile that sparkled like the ruby pins in her sandstone hair. She came close for a kiss on the cheek before she sat down in the chair at Salome's left hand. Lady Lien's walk was tight, so also her mouth and her gray sheath gown. She whispered close to Salome's ear. "My sister insisted." Salome looked past her shoulder to Lady Tifi, who was taking a seat on the facing couch. She and Lien did resemble each other, though Tifi's long straight hair was sifted gray instead of pure black. Salome kissed Lien's cheek. "You're both welcome. Please have a seat. Our household keeper will be pleased to know that her tea cakes are held in such high regard." Under the watchful gaze of her younger sister, Tifi returned the smile, but the faint blue tinge of her lips matched a chill in her eyes. "I wouldn't have missed them." Kier entered then, through the double doors from the back of the suite. She hesitated a moment at the sight of Lady Tifi, but there was only one chair left at Salome's right. She took it, flashing a nervous smile. "I'm Salome's cousin, Kier. Had you already started talking about it?" "Not at all," Salome said quickly. But when it came to proposing a less fraught topic of conversation, her mind whirled and came up blank. Fortunately, showing impeccable timing, the household keeper appeared in her black silk dress, carrying the cakes. Her presentation was never the same twice. Today she brought a sculpture of a fountain, 5 crystal spouts rising to different heights from a slate basin below. Atop each spout balanced a glass bowl delicate as a bubble, and inside each bowl lay a pearl-white cake garnished with a single red marshberry. Salome herself could not help joining in the general sigh of admiration. Tea pouring and the passing of cake bowls extended her reprieve, while the conversation turned to sweets, art, sweets as art, and where to find the most skilled keepers. Salome pressed her fork into the pliant surface of her cake, dared a bite. But every pause clutched at her, begging to be filled with harmless normality. Here was a topic that might be harmless enough. "By the way, those are lovely hairpins you're wearing today, Ryo." Ryo chuckled, licking berry juice from her lips. Her pale hand fluttered up to her hair. "Rubies are the gems of this year, Salome. We're all wearing them, even you." "Me?" Her own dress was sapphire blue, but then she remembered the bracelet on her wrist. Lien wore rubies on the neckline of her dress, Tifi wore them in a band down the center of her bodice, and Kier wore them in a spiral brooch at her shoulder. Salome's confidence faltered. "We're wearing blood. All of us." She tried to cover her consternation with a sip of tea, but too soon. It burned her lip. Nothing could be harmless when the truth hid everywhere. She set down the cup. "All right, I know what you're all here for. You want to know about Zareth's proposal, and I want to know what you've heard and how you are thinking about it." To protect Kier, she assumed her cousin's argument like a cloak. "Personally, I don't think it goes far enough." Kier sat straighter. "You don't? But I thought you said—" "What a thing to say!" Tifi cried. Salome smiled carefully and folded her hands on her lap so they wouldn't shake. She could handle this. It wasn't the first time she'd been the target of all eyes at once. "I'm not afraid to say it," she replied. Zareth wants to prevent deaths like that of Lady Indelis. He thought the best way would be to allow ladies who had come close to death to retire from their duties. His intent is not to hasten the decline, but to allow ladies to raise their own children, and actually, also, to allow them more recovery time from birth injuries before they must consider pregnancy again. That was a good idea. Sometimes she surprised herself. Birth injuries, Lady Kier shuddered visibly. Mercy of Hail. I understand your fear, Kier, Salome said reassuringly. That's why it's important to allow time for complete recovery. After all, a healthier mother will bear a healthier child. It won't work, said Lady Ryo. The reminder of blood glinted from her hair as she shook her head. I mean, retirement sounds good, but who's going to enforce it? We can't send Arisen guards into bedrooms. That's true, Salome admitted. Then forgive me, who is going to tell our gentlemen no? Salome winced. Her heart wanted to protest, but how recently had she tasted this fear despite how deeply she trusted Zareth? She almost looked over her shoulder at Grivi. Well, we'll just have to think of something, I imagine. The wording of the proposal hasn't been finalized yet. This is ridiculous, Lien muttered. Lowers have children when they want to. Lowers, Tifi grunted. There are plenty of them. Lien's pale cheeks flushed. Having too many children is killing us, Tifi. And it still isn't stopping the decline. If we're all going to die anyway, do we have to be miserable while we're doing it? Lien, said Ryo, I had no idea you were so upset. Is something wrong? What's wrong is that you're even considering this nonsense, Tifi said. Politics is gentlemen's business. But this is about our lives, protested Kier. And it's our children who stand to lose their mothers, said Lien. I can't believe you, sister, Tifi hissed through her teeth, that you'd associate yourself with selfish cats who would turn their backs on the future of the race. Tifi, stop. Salome spoke measuredly into the shocked silence that followed. I don't believe it's selfish to try to understand the impact of the rules that gentlemen impose on our lives. The fact is, the proposal in its current form was my partner's idea, and it's uninformed in many ways and incomplete. This is why it is so important for us to discuss it. The race requires a higher form of loyalty, Tifi said. These are the burdens of power. Oh? Salome asked, clamping down on a surge of anger and forcing a smile. And would you like to tell us about the number and health of your children, then? How your sacrifices have rewarded you with success? She'd heard enough about her from conversations with Lien and Tamalera to know that Tifi couldn't answer that. A muscle tightened in the older woman's jaw. Lien threw a keen glance at her sister and stood up. Salome, I'm so sorry. We better go. She took a deep breath. Darling, what a shame. She squeezed Lien's hand, trying to catch her eye. Please, let's talk another time. Lien and Tifi's swift departure left the other guests in a fluster, and they soon excused themselves also. Is there tea left? Salome sighed. Imbati Grivi lifted the pot, nodded, and refreshed her now cooled teacup. Salome sighed, pressing its edge to her lower lip, inhaling the steam. In a way, the utter failure of her subtlety had taught her what was out there. Fear, despair, thirst, fury, and lots of arguing. Kier had come out unscathed, at least. But her own satisfaction with Zareth's proposal had not. Tifi demonstrated that any legislation of this nature would be strongly resisted, and Ryo was correct that gentlemen would seize upon any excuse to dismiss restrictions on their behavior, even if it passed. Grivi, she said, How soon can we be ready to go out? I know of nothing that would prevent us going now, mistress. I need to discuss this with Zareth. Our proposal needs some revisions. When she had given herself permission to go to Zareth's office, this was official legislative business, after all, her resolve outpaced her ability to walk there. Salome left the suite's wing and began to cross the central section, but her left hip twinged. She squeezed her Greavy's hand for a pause. By the tall bronze doors of the Hall of the Eminence, she cast an eye about, but saw only Embati child messengers flitting through and Arisan guards, powerful and still in their orange uniforms. No one to care if she shook her leg a bit. After a few seconds, she tested her weight on the foot. Workable. A bit more slowly, they crossed into the office's wing. Zareth's was the first door on the left. All 5 young men in the front office stopped what they were doing as she walked in. One of them was her son, Brinks. He sprang up from the steel desk he'd been leaning on and straightened the hem of his malachite-striped coat. "Mother? Holy Siren's luck!" he exclaimed, grinning. "Fedrin sent me over here only 10 minutes ago. We've been going over the minutes of the last cabinet meeting. If you'd come 5 minutes earlier, I'd have been busy. 5 minutes later, and I'd been back next door." He kissed her cheek. "Would you like to come see where I work?" Salome smiled. As a child, Brinks had told stories to her for hours, even conversed with the vaulted ceilings when no one else was available. These days, she was seldom the recipient of that bright attention. "I'd love to, Treasure, but I've come to see your father." Brinks pulled a sober face. "Of course. Shall I take you in?" "I don't think he has another meeting for at least 16 minutes. "Yes, please." Brinks resumed, bubbling while she followed him to the inner door. "You're lucky that he's in there by himself right now. He's had all sorts of meetings today and messengers. We've gotten 5 of them at least. 6, I think, actually. Yes, 6. It's because of the stir, of course. The one Father started when he announced his Endelis proposal. We've never been so busy." He pushed the door open a crack. "Sir? Father? Mother's here." "Salome? Come in, come in." Zareth came to her quickly. His blue eyes searched her with concern. But when she smiled at him, he brightened. She released Greavy's hand to take his. "Everything's fine, dear," she said. "I need to talk to you about the proposal." "I hope you're not worrying, Mother," said Brinks. "Our conversations are going well." He raised one finger. "Give them respite, gentlemen. Think first of the health of your partner if you wish a healthy child, and the blood of the race will grow stronger." "We don't vote for another week or so," Zareth explained. "This is the part where we sound people out and argue for the idea. Our most powerful argument is exactly what Brinks says, and people are responding well to it. I'm optimistic." Hearing her earlier thought put so differently made her doubt any of these gentlemen were serious about real retirement. "Have you changed any part of the proposal?" she asked. "Added anything?" "No. Why do you ask?" "Well, have you talked with anyone about how to enforce it?" "Mother, don't worry," said Brinks. "Cartoonin will do as they're told." "Cartoonin?" She flashed him a look. "It's not them I'm worried about, Brinks. It's the gentlemen. No one will want to give up their chance to benefit this race. They'll cling to excuses." The incredulity on his face forced her to search for examples that filled her with distaste. No, she wasn't injured enough, or no, we had a good doctor, so she really wasn't in any danger. Brinks pursed his lips into the same wanting to protest moue that he always had as a child. She rolled her eyes and turned to her partner. "You know they will, Zareth." Zareth looked at her in silence for a moment. "Yes," he sighed. "I imagine they will. Should we specify that the doctor must have assessed the risk of death at greater than 50%? She shuddered. "Do Cartoonin do that? Isn't that heartless of them?" Not every time, I don't imagine. 50% seems low, put in Brinks. Maybe it should be 60. Brinks, said Zareth, you might want to think carefully before you say something like that. I wrote the proposal for your mother. Wasn't it for Lady Indelis? Brinks exclaimed, but his face fell quickly from puzzlement to shock. Oh, Mother, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Salome found his hand and squeezed it. Well, you can see, can't you, why we can't have this be negotiable. I see what you're saying, said Brinks. The problem is, negotiation is exactly what this part of the process is for. But treasure, that's what I'm doing right now, negotiating it. Salome turned back to Zareth. How many men do you know who'd be willing to bargain the continuation of their families against their partners' lives? How many are doing this already? Speaking over a doctor's word in the name of ending the decline. Zareth was too frustrating in his silence. Zareth, she insisted, you know how easy it is to speak over a doctor's word, how dangerous it is. Father, did you... Brinks began, but Zareth raised his hand and stopped him with a glance. Salome, my jewel, you're right, but no one will agree to give up such a power to Cartoonin. The power doesn't need to be in the Cartoonin, she explained, carefully restraining her tone. Neither should it be. As lowers, they lack final authority. Put this in the law itself. Make a list of risks, of injuries, and how serious they are. Take it out of everyone's hands, as if it were the will of Alinda. Father, you still have to get the list from a Cartoonin, said Brinks. Brinks, I know how to get lists from Cartoonin, Zareth replied, and Brinks blushed. Thank you, Salome. I'll send my Ustin tomorrow morning. Come see my desk, Mother, said Brinks. I'm not finished, though, Salome said. There's another problem, a more serious one, a more private one. Which one? Zareth asked. She squirmed inside. Might this be easier to discuss if Brinks weren't here? Possibly, but saying rape was awful regardless. She dodged the word. Well, we've talked about the will of Mother Alinda, but we haven't spoken about her partner. Father Varen, Brinks raised his eyebrows. Do you mean what punishment to levy for transgression? That's for the joint cabinet to decide. She sighed. Brinks, love, I'll lend you my copy of the ancient stories when your brother has finished reading it. Salome opened her hands to Zareth, who was staring at her silently, with a wrinkle deepening over his nose. Remember, Father Varen gnashes the wicked in his fiery teeth in atonement for his own transgressions. Still no recognition in Zareth's eyes. The transgressions that led Mother Alinda to reject him. Oh! Zareth cried suddenly. But that's... Oh, dear. Father, what? But Salome, would they really? What a question, she turned it around. Perhaps you mean to ask whether gentlemen would really be willing to sacrifice their desires for their partner's safety? Some would. You would. But most gentlemen are not you. Must I speak with the ladies of the Pelismara Society to give you a number? Zareth ran one hand through his silver hair uncomfortably. What are you talking about? Brinks demanded. Master, said Imbati Ustin, I can verify by Imbati witness 3 rapists among those first family gentlemen known to me. If you wish it, I can investigate and expand my knowledge to assess the scope of the problem across the Pelismara Society. It could have a substantial impact on this proposal's implementation. In the Imbati's icy voice it felt terrifyingly real. Salome swore. Name of my... Who? I don't know, mistress. I'm sorry. Salome gaped at her. For whom was she protecting that information? Would she tell Zareth if he asked? Brinks, who had been spluttering, found words. "Father, you must reprimand your Ustan." "You think so?" Zareth narrowed his eyes. "Why is that? Accusing her betters of such a thing? I can't think of anything more presumptuous." "Brinks," Zareth said slowly, "please think what you're saying. Ustan has worked as my personal and political assistant and bodyguard for 12 years. In all that time she has never failed to safeguard me or my information, nor have I caught her in any inaccuracy. Her qualities are guaranteed by the certification of the Embati Service Academy, just as your servants are, and this information is quite relevant to our success." Brinks flushed. "I know. I'm sorry, Father, and I do really want to help you pass this proposal. If this is uncomfortable for you, why don't you just let me talk with your mother? Fedron's got several people he's negotiating with, and I'm sure he'd appreciate your help right now." "Yes, of course, Father. I'll see you at dinner." It was quite common for a room to feel silent after Brink stepped out of it, but this silence was one Salome hesitated to step into. Her mind whirled in horror and suspicion of the men she knew. Zareth stared into the distance, dismay written deep into the lines of his face. "This," he sighed, "I don't know." That was not what she'd expected him to say. "What don't you know?" she asked. "I had no idea this was such a huge problem. The question is, how do we address it?" She looked to his Ustan for support, but Ustan didn't speak. The manservant's mark arched across her pale forehead like the bars of a closed gate. "No, Salome," Zareth said. "We can't address it." "Why not?" He rubbed his forehead. "This is a legislative proposal, which will be discussed and voted on by the cabinet. We can't lose sight of that. Proposals with divided goals fail, even when their goals are entirely ordinary, and I really don't want this one to fail." "Oh, gods, if it failed," she gulped a breath. "I need to sit down." "I'm sorry, love," said Zareth. "By all means." Greavy was swift to deliver one of the metal chairs that faced Zareth's desk. Salome sat with relief and tried to gather her thoughts. This proposal no longer felt like it was about her, but about Ryo, Lien, and Kier, and about her own daughters. To fail would be a disaster. But what if they succeeded, and the law were meaningless to those who most needed it? "Ladies are vulnerable," she said quietly. "You're right," Zareth agreed. He took the other chair which Ustan brought for him, as Lady Indelis was vulnerable. "Or as I was," she said, "in a medical center, helpless to the wishes of doctors and family." He shook his head. "I'm sorry." "I'm not angry," she assured him, "but some ladies are also vulnerable at home, and we can't send Arishan into bedrooms to enforce this law." The very idea was appalling. "Embati are already there," Zareth mused, "but we don't want to put such power in the Embati either." She raised her eyebrows at him. "Dear, it's hardly a reasonable demand on them, even if we did." "True." Salome ran her eyes about the office as if the answer might be hiding here somewhere, hanging among Zareth's numerous certificates or tucked between the law books on his shelves. "Wait," she said. "Even if we can't do anything about the gentleman, this proposal aims to prevent dangerous pregnancies. So what about the medicines? What had that cartoonin mentioned at the party? Something." Zareth looked like she'd stuck him with a pin. "Those are illegal." "So we're proposing a new law, aren't we?" "A gentleman would never consent to compromise his fertility." "I would, if it meant that I were never put at risk again." He blinked at her. You would? Isn't that what we already decided? Zareth didn't answer, but shook his head in consternation. Then beside her, left ear, Greavy rumbled in his throat. Yes, Greavy. Mistress, you should be aware that contraceptive medications, when properly used, have no permanent effect on fertility. Well, all right then. Even for Groball? Zareth asked. I know of no genetic contraindications, sir, said Greavy. I'm just not sure anyone would agree to it. Could one really ask a man to waste his value to the race? Zareth frowned at the floor and began cracking his knuckles, one after the other. She realized then he was frightened. Dear, what if we tried it? He twitched and shook his head. You're suggesting... No, I could never ask my Ustin to procure something illegally. Master, said Ustin, I can procure something for myself with perfect legality. That was it. Ustin was a woman and would have done this before. Then all she'd have to do was get her hands on it, and then... Salome put her hand over Zareth's and squeezed. Think of it. The triangular white pill was small, almost indistinguishable from the marble of the bathroom counter. Salome forced herself to see it, to confront what she had to do. Greavy's unwillingness to aid her in any aspect of the medication only magnified her sense of transgression. After 7 days, it had become no easier. I'm not harming anyone. I'm doing this for Enziel, for Avon, for Pelly, and for myself. The Cartoonen have deemed it safe. Imbati Ustin herself has used this. A Groball is not so different from a lower. That will affect me differently. It is not harming me. It is not harming me. She swept it up and swallowed it before she could lose her nerve. That was it. She chased it down with an extra glass of water just to be sure. Her body had been feeling a little different, but that could have been her mind's suggestion. Stripped of the magic that younger women had always begged her to imbue them with, she felt. Don't say hollow. I'm more than that. I've already contributed 5 healthy children to the race. Her triumphs were written in her body, where no one could take them away. Pale ripples in the skin of her belly and hips proved she had received Elinda's gift, that she could grow like the moon to nurture souls. Her breasts had earned their delicious softness with each precious suckling touch. She raised her head and looked her reflection in the eye. And now you've contributed to the content of a legislative proposal. So what do you think of that? A strange light crept over her face from beneath, turning its features unfamiliar. Salome glanced down. A wisp had entered the room, and now turned circles beside her knee. She smiled at it. The wisp understood, but she was going to do this anyway. She raised both hands over her head, allowing Greavy to slip the sleeves of her silk robe over them. Then she closed the robe and took his hand to walk out to the bedroom, where Zareth was waiting. Zareth pushed up on one elbow at the sight of her. His worry wrinkles were deeper than usual. He looked even more concerned than he had yesterday, if that was even possible. She allowed Greavy to seat her on the edge of the bed. Once Greavy vanished under his curtain, she took a deep breath. I'm all right, Zareth, she said, and told her body silently. You are all right. Show him. She pulled her legs up on the bed and beckoned. Zareth moved close to her side and put his arm around her shoulders. His warmth, his stability, his soft silver hair faintly scented with perfume. Simultaneous waves of nostalgia and longing crashed together inside her, brimming in her eyes and stealing her breath. She leaned into him. I've missed you so, Zareth said. And all she could manage was a nod. It was harder to wait this time. Hardest to wait when that wait might never end. She nodded into the crook of his neck and shoulder. She could feel his soft, furred, warm skin against her side, against her breast. She reached for his arm and stroked it from elbow to fingers, found the outer edge of his hand and squeezed it as hard as she could. Seraph, I didn't mean to push you away. I didn't want you gone. I just was so scared to. The words brought back the reality of what they were attempting. She jerked back and found him staring at her in dismay. So, he'd arrived at the very same thought. She blew out a breath between her lips. Carefully. We're not doing this for politics. I'm not doing this for politics. The words sounded false. Seraph seemed to crumple in on himself. Nobody could possibly agree to this, he muttered. Why did I ever make you? You didn't make me. I convinced you, and Ustin helped me. He glanced toward the service curtain on his side of the bed and heaved a sigh. Please don't blame her, Salome said. Seraph shook his head. I don't, really. She does her job well. Too well, some might say. There's no such thing as an embody who serves too well, Salome shrugged. This is the only possible solution to our problem, and for her, this isn't political, it's normal. We aren't like them, Seraph said sadly. Fevers that kill Grobel scarcely touch them. Who's to say you haven't done something terrible with this medicine and will never conceive a child again? But I don't want to conceive a child again. Ha! The laugh burst from him all at once like a bark. Her face burned. Seraph, I thought we agreed. No, Siren and Ain. I'm so sorry. We do. Of course we do. It's just hearing you say it. He rubbed his face with both hands. I wish there were a way for this to be normal for us. Passing the law would make it normal. Except we can't pass a law until we try this. It's normal for lowers. A thought struck her suddenly. What if we were lowers? You're not serious. Impetuously, she tossed her bathrobe back from her shoulders. We're both naked. Who's to say we haven't just set our marks aside? We could be arisen, residence guards who've shed their caste mark color. He raised his eyebrows skeptically. I can't imagine anything less romantic. Not guards, then. What if we were cartoonin'? I'm a dancer. She shimmied a little and ran her hands down the curve of her breasts and belly. And you're a... The sound was still skeptical, but there was something of a chuckle hidden in it, too. No, I can't. She huffed at him. Oh, come on, you're my accompanist. And you play drums with your feet. She leaned over and shook one of his feet through the quilted silk. And you play pipes, of course, because you have such... She found his hand. Marvelous. She twined it in hers. Fingers. He gave her a real chuckle this time, one that awoke heat in her stomach. You're so beautiful, my Salome. She placed 3 fingers over his mouth. I can't imagine who you're talking about. Someone. He took a deep breath. Someone in a song. That's right, because we can sing too. And we paint ourselves every morning. Like this. He licked one finger and ran it over her lower lip. Salome pounced and caught the finger in her mouth. It didn't stay long. Seraph's mouth replaced it. Whenever her conflicting fears tried to rise up, she just kissed harder and clutched him more tightly against her. Her leg twinged once when he knelt between her knees, but she squirmed into a better position. And once he entered her, she forgot everything but their ecstatic unity. Zareth shifted beside her afterward, his panting gradually giving way to gentler breaths. Then he laughed. Well, I know how to convince the cabinet to add medicine to our law. Salome let out a sigh, and the weight in her mind floated her way. Siren and Ein, she swore. Part of me wants to do that 10 times before morning. The other part of me is a little tired. Tired, my love. I'm sure if I can muster a bit more energy at my age, you can too. He stroked her face, her neck, his hand settled around her left breast. She stretched beneath his touch. She said. I didn't say I couldn't. It troubled her, though, to be reminded of his 60 years. Are we so old, Zareth? I suppose we are. Does it matter? I don't know. I felt old, thinking of what it meant to retire, thinking it would be the end. But I still wanted to. Of course you did. But now, maybe it doesn't have to be. She turned her head to look into his eyes. If you can convince them, Zareth, it doesn't have to be. Do you know what else doesn't have to end? Zareth asked. His smile made her catch her breath. Salome breathed against his lips. Tonight. Let our law pass today, Salome murmured. Siren, bring us luck to let it pass, please. Let it pass. Her greavy was in the midst of fastening the buttons at the back of her gown. She'd picked feldspar gray today to inspire herself with the steadiness of stone. Feeling nervous wouldn't help. Only the cabinet representatives of the great families were allowed into the cabinet room for the vote, but she was determined to go, even just to wait outside for the result. There you go, mistress, Greavy said. Thank you, Greavy. She took his hand and they walked out across the private drawing room. Maybe this once Zareth would let her walk there with him. Greavy pushed open the bronze double doors into the sitting room. The sitting room was full of strange embati, all dressed in black, all marked with the crescent cross tattoo of the household. The vestibule curtain and the front door both stood wide open. Salome shook her head, blinking. What's going on? 2 embati emerged from Zareth's office carrying something. It looked like a stretcher. Wait, those were Zareth's feet. Zareth! Gods, what happened? She half hopped, half ran to his side, fell to her knees and grasped his hand, pressed her lips to it, but he didn't respond. Please excuse us, lady. We must get him to the medical center as quickly as possible. Oh, yes. She released Zareth's hand and scooted backward. The black-clad stretcher-bearers moved so fast that he was out the door in half a breath. Salome sat, panting. At last she reached up, found her Greavy's hand, and tried to stand. Her left foot caught on the hem of her gown, but he caught her when she stumbled, freed the fabric, and helped her the rest of the way up. Arriving on her feet, she found Zareth's Ustin standing directly in front of her. Mistress, Ustin said, I was attending the master's preparations in his office. He summoned the first houseman to send you a message because he was concerned you would not be ready in time. Then he stood up and collapsed. In my witness, the first houseman agreed. Hail, have mercy, Salome whispered. Let him reach the medical center in time. Elinda, forbear. She cast her eyes toward the front door, now shut, the sitting room now empty of the household emergency team. You would almost think nothing had happened. And how could it have? If she stayed in this moment, unbreathing, unthinking, nothing would have happened. Her body corrected her, of course. She gasped and shook herself. I should go to him. Mistress. The embody was still in front of her. She frowned. What, Ustin? The master had no opportunity to record his vote for today's cabinet meeting. No opportunity to record his vote. She heard the sounds missing emotional register. They resolved only slowly into meaning. Did that mean their proposal might fail? It has to pass, she murmured. With your permission, mistress, I can escort you to the cabinet room. She started to understand it. So I can tell them, and then go to the medical center. Yes, mistress. All right, then, let's go. The hallway was walkable. She had to take a brief stop on the spiral staircase to the second floor, Uston above her, Greavy behind. She gripped tight to the cold iron rail, pressed her right hand against the central stone column, and started up again. Uston murmured to her as she emerged into the hall. You understand, mistress, that because he didn't record his vote, I could not deliver it. She nodded. That's why I'm doing it. Uston hesitated a second, her lips pressed together, but then she resumed course into the central section of the residence. Salome kept walking. Greavy's arm beneath hers was muscular and solid. Since the heir's suite faced the front of the residence, she'd always known the cabinet chamber was down the hall toward the back of the building. But she hadn't realized it was on the left side. The bronze door was engraved with the repeating insignia of the Grobel. There should have been people here standing in the hall, cabinet members, shouldn't there? Where are they? Salome asked. I believe they have gone in, mistress, Uston replied. Please be aware, Greavy and I are not permitted into the room during the meeting. You are the only one who can represent the first family. Mistress, Greavy objected in a low growl. I'll only be a moment, Greavy. She let herself through the door. All talk in the windowless room stopped immediately. So many eyes staring at her, and all of them belonged to men. The men sitting around the big brass table. The men in the heavy portraits staring down from the walls. She recognized the man at the head of the table. That had to be the Eminence Indal, because he had a noble nose and wore the white and gold drape of office around his shoulders. Next to him, golden-skinned and curly-haired, sat the heir, Heron. Everyone agreed how handsome the heir was. The others were strangers. No, here was one more she knew. Fedron, her cousin in the first family. Fedron stood up. Lady Salome, what are you doing here? Her voice felt tiny, as if she spoke across a crevasse. I'm representing the first family. Zareth. The ground beneath her shuddered, or it could have been her legs. She found a chair to hold on to. Zareth collapsed. They took him to the medical center. What? Cried Fedron. When? She blinked at him. No, I came directly. Everyone started talking at once. Several of the men leapt up from their chairs. Some of them seemed angry at each other. She quickly lost sight of the Eminence and heir behind a clump of worried cabinet members. The portraits still stared down from the walls, but Zareth meant nothing to them. Only Cousin Fedron appeared to remember she was here. I'm so sorry, cousin. You must be distraught. I don't have time for that. I need to be here for the vote, she explained. Fedron cast a sideways glance, maybe looking for one of the other men. We can't possibly vote now under the circumstances. Perhaps when Zareth returns. We can't? Are you unattended? She shook her head. No, of course not. They're waiting outside for us to vote. We should really vote. Cousin, we can't vote today, Fedron said with an exaggerated patience. The Eminence and several of the members have already left. They have? She looked around. It did seem emptier than a moment ago. The Eminence was really gone. That wasn't how it was supposed to happen. None of this was how it was supposed to happen. But now she had somewhere she needed to be, the medical center. Salome took a deep breath and smoothed down her gray skirts. Cautiously, she turned back toward the engraved door and made her way through it. In the hall, a few cabinet members were talking and arguing. Mbati Greavy and Mbati Uston stood waiting for her. They looked all wrong, not calm at all. Greavy's tattoo was furrowed, and he cast a gaze of anger at Ustin, whose face twitched into a battle to conceal some strong emotion. Ustin managed to master herself, but then cast a glance down the hall. "Mistress." Greavy stepped between them. "Ustin, that's enough." Startled by his ferocity, Salome sought after the target of Ustin's furtive glance. Someone was hurrying up the corridor toward them. Brinks? Her son's handsome face was nearly unrecognizable, his eyes red and his mouth twisted. I can't believe you, Mother," he shouted. "Why didn't you come find me to tell me? How could you come here at a time like this?" Time shrank to a pinpoint. If he spoke again, she didn't hear it. Why hadn't she recognized the signs? Hadn't she noticed how cold Zareth's hand felt against her lips? Why had she never wondered why Ustin accompanied her here instead of staying with her master? Why had she not realized only disaster could make embodies show emotion? Now, all the stones crashed together, and the bottom dropped out of the world. This was obviously the funeral of an important man. The voice of Alinda wore full priestly regalia, dark blue robes, and a heavy silver moon disk around her neck. She sang the service in a contralto of liquid grief. The eminence Indal and the heir were here, and every member of the cabinet, and nearly half of the Pelismara Society too, all crowded into the chapel on the residence's second floor. Salome couldn't feel it. Her eyes and throat hurt, but no tears came. All she could do was hold Avon's hand and curl an arm around Coram, who clung to her, muffling his sobs in her stomach. Pelly's Verid had decided to take her for a walk when she started squirming. Brinks sat on the far side of his sister Enziel and her 8th family partner because he wasn't speaking to anyone. Salome leaned her head down against Coram's curls, reversing the room in the corner of her eye. A shinka tree trunk glowed silver in the back, casting eerie clarity across the gathering. Since shinka could not be removed, the stone wall would have been built around it long ago, and in this room the ceiling had been designed with arches to look like its branches. That should have been the front of the room. It had been, once. She and Zareth had spoken vows to each other in the warm aura of the tree, invoking the blessed names of Siren and Ain. She'd imagined their partnership just as invulnerable. The illusions of a 17-year-old child. "Mother," Avon whispered. "Mother." Salome lifted her head. The voice of Alinda was walking toward them with arms outstretched. One golden hand held a box of precious wood, the other a basket of silver wire heaped with yellow mourning silk. "Coram," she murmured, "let me stand. It's all right. Please, just don't fall on the floor." He crumpled sideways, gulping back tears, and she managed to get up, though her left leg felt numb from sitting too long on the metal bench. "May the wounds of grief become the gifts of remembrance," said the voice. Salome took the box and pulled a mourning scarf from the basket. "Thank you, Mother Alinda." The children were supposed to receive their scarves next, but actually Avon took 3 because Pelly was gone and Coram wouldn't look up. While the voice moved on to Enziel and Brinks, Salome helped Avon and Coram get their scarves fastened around their arms, snug just below the elbow with the ends fluttering down. Around her, other people began standing, but there was no hurry to go anywhere. She opened the glossy lid of the box. The sight of Zareth's name engraved on the crystal spirit globe inside brought such a tide of grief it nearly overwhelmed her, and she snapped it shut. "Lady Salome," said a man's voice, heavy with tears. "May Zareth take his place among the stars, and may Hyle and Alinda continue to bless you and your family." She looked up, It was Administrator Vull holding young Pyarus by the hand. He offered his other hand, and she took it. "Thank you, Administrator." "Cousin, please, or just Vull. We have too much in common to insist on formality, don't we?" Her breath hitched, and she closed her eyes to wrestle it back into control. "I suppose we do, cousin." Vull nudged his son, and Pyra said with admirable sobriety, "I'm very, 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 very sorry." Then impulsively he hugged her. Salome stroked his head. "Thank you, Pyrrhus." The boy watched her over his shoulder as his father led him away. There was a nudge at Salome's elbow. She turned to find Embody Ustin pressing a note into her hand. It read, "Do you wish to attend the next cabinet meeting?" She stared. "Ustin, now is really not a good time." "Mistress," said Creevy, "I believe your daughter wishes to speak to you." Salome turned back and took Enziel in her arms. The girl was taller than her now and still growing. Oh, God's helper, that was Zareth's height. Would she also inherit the defect that had led to his aneurysm? "May I'll preserve you," she said fervently against her daughter's shoulder. "Are you all right?" "Oh, Mother, I think I should be asking you that question." Trying to answer that would release the flood. She shook her head. "I love you, Enziel. I wish you could come home for dinner sometimes." "I'll be at dinner tonight. I'll try to come by more, and..." Enziel leaned so close Salome was enveloped in her cloud of curls. Her daughter's sweet breath warmed her ear. "I've got good news." "Oh, sweet Alinda, no." "I'm pregnant." Salome's hands fisted involuntarily. She tried to say congratulations, but fear had cramped her guts, and what came out sounded like a sob. She fought to control herself while Enziel's gentle hand caressed the back of her neck. Salome gulped another breath. "You'll take care of yourself, won't you? Don't just rely on your embody. Seek a cartoonin doctor at the medical center as well." "I will, Mother. I promise." Greavy murmured behind her. "Do you wish to retire, mistress?" Salome nodded. She stepped carefully toward the aisle, holding Greavy's hand across the bench that had separated them. A man she didn't know stood half blocking her exit into the aisle, watching her. "Excuse me," said Salome. "My condolences on your loss, Lady Salome," the man said. "I'm Sylvan of the second family." "Thank you. But let's face it, it could have been worse." She could only blink at him. "It could have been you. Think of the tragedy if your great gift had been lost to the race. You must give your family council my name when they suggest a new partnership for you." Disgust knocked her back a step. Before the man uttered another word, Greavy appeared between them, looking directly into his face. "You will excuse us, sir," he said, his deep growl all the more disturbing for its utter calm. The man and his servant quickly backed off and vanished in the crowd, rather than risk a physical confrontation. Greavy's shoulders rose once with a deep breath, and then he offered Salome his hand again. "Bless you, Greavy," she whispered. "I am here to protect you, mistress." "Salome, cousin, are you all right?" That was Lady Kier, who hurried up and embraced her. "I saw what happened." She grimaced. "Fine enough." Arbiter Eric's caught up with his partner a moment later. He fanned his chest a little, breathing fast. "Cousin, I'm so sorry." He gestured to the compact, embodied woman behind him. "Please allow my Quarme to help escort you home." Salome shook her head. "It's kind of you, but I'll be fine. I have Greavy and Ustin with me, and I'll have Verid too soon enough." She began walking toward the exit. "If you're sure," Eric said. That was disgraceful behavior. In fact, my Quarme got his name. We'll be reporting him to his family council. Rest assured you won't have to consider tunnel hounds like him when the time comes. Someone like Administrator Vull would be a much better match. Salome almost stumbled. She gritted her teeth and clung to Greavy to keep going. "Come, children," she said. "It's time to go home." She would have run if she could. Her eyes burned, and she scarcely raised her eyes from the floor until they had collected Pele and Verid and were all the way downstairs, safe in their home vestibule, the front door shut and locked, and the children dismissed to the care of the household. "Where's Ustin?" The tall Imbati woman presented herself with a bow. Salome took a deep breath. "Imbati Ustin, I know you've been concerned about securing lodging while you're considering new employment inquiries. Please feel welcome to stay in our household." "Thank you, mistress. And in return, I'd like you to make certain I attend the next cabinet meeting." They were playing Quaros, or trying to. You had to do something once the cousins, friends, and well-wishers left, and it helped her ignore the piles of condolence gifts that filled their private drawing room. Salome sat across from Avon, who occasionally hiccuped to hold back tears, but still had grasped the rules pretty well. When Salome picked up an emerald-helmed warrior, Pele snatched it from her hand and ran away giggling. Salome only sighed, and Pele slowed, falling into a droop. "Pele, big girl, may I have that back? Bring over your puzzle if you want to play. Bring it over here next to us." Pele lifted the emerald-helmed warrior and stared at it. Salome turned her attention back to the board and pointed to a junction. "I'll put it there whenever Pele brings it back." She glanced over. "Please, baby." Avon moved one of her pieces forward on a left diagonal. "Not there," said Coram. It was the first he'd spoken in hours. He draped himself over the back of the couch next to her. "She'll get you an entrapment. Use the inverse move instead." Avon pulled a face at him. "Mother, what happens if a piece crosses the whole board?" "It walks right off into darkness, like at the edge of the city caverns, like at the end of the world, like in my dreams. And then it has to keep going anyway, one breath, one step, in this place with no air and no light." Pele's soft fingers were tickling her hands. Salome took a breath and stroked them, and found the golden warrior had been returned, wearing a hat of twisted white paper. "Thank you, big girl. All right. So, Avon, the game changes once a warrior is able to cross the board because—" The vestibule curtain swished open, revealing Imbati Ustin. "Mistress," Ustin bowed, "I apologize for the interruption. I've learned that an emergency cabinet meeting has been called for tonight. If you wish to attend, we must hurry." "Hurry? What should I do?" Salome stood, searching the space around her for reasons to feel prepared. "I should tell the children. Children, I'm going to step out for a few minutes. I won't be long. Coram, why don't you take my place at Quaros? Pele," she bent and kissed her, "I love you, big girl. Be back soon, all right?" "Mama back," Pele answered. Salome searched the room again, but found only absence and grief. "Am I ready?" she asked. Greavy offered his arm. "You are dressed for guests, mistress. That will be perfectly appropriate." Ustin nodded. "I'll brief you on our way." Salome tried to project confidence on her way to the front door so as not to alarm the children. It would be all right. Vedran would be there. She wouldn't be alone. And she had to be there. "Mistress," said Ustin, walking behind her right shoulder, "we must have you seated in the cabinet room before any of the other members arrive. Can you walk faster?" Oh, yes. She'd been fighting the urge to run along the carpeted hall. All she needed to do was give in slightly and hold tighter to Greavy's hand. She skipped a little, taking extra hops on her right foot. "There are two types of votes, mistress," said Ustin. "Procedural votes are the ones that allow cabinet business to continue. For those, simply follow your cousin Grobel Fredrin's lead." All right. There are 2 legislative votes scheduled, so far as I know, in addition to the Indelis proposal. 2? The carpet ended where the corridor gave into the residence's central section. Salome misstepped. Pain stabbed down the back of her left leg. Ugh! She hung on Greavy's arm. The pain had flashed and gone, but not gone completely, it echoed. She gritted her teeth. This isn't going to work. Why am I even trying? Elinda, help me. How can I not? Mistress, Greavy murmured. May I carry you? She shook her head vigorously. No, it's already bad enough. If people saw us... Catching a silent exchange of looks between Ustin and Greavy, she frowned and then realized the problem. The cabinet chamber was upstairs. How can I get upstairs, Ustin? I have to be there. I have an idea, Ustin replied. Greavy, if you both would please meet me at the door of the household director's office. She loped off beneath the arch into the public foyers of the central section. Mistress, said Greavy slowly, can you walk? Hard to answer that question, but I will. She managed it by focusing on the floor, polished stone in one room, a carpet with geometric patterns in black and green. Ancient tile in the foyer before the hall of the eminence, worn to white mostly, but near the wall still showing an intricate branching design in gold, step by step. The Mbati household director kept an office just beside the main front entrance. Its bronze door was uncurtained because of the frequency of messengers, and today it stood open. Ustin returned to them as they drew nearer. I've spoken to Assistant Director Samira, she said in a low voice. We have permission. Let's take her elbows. Greavy gave a reluctant-sounding grunt, but then Salome found herself lifted a finger's breadth from the floor and ushered at high speed toward the door. Just as they reached it, the 2 Mbati turned her sideways, and they went through. Salome gulped. This was not Grobel territory. On a tall metal stool sat a golden-skinned woman with a straight hair pulled severely back from her crescent-cross household tattoo. She looked up from an ordinator screen full of glowing green symbols and regarded them with a fierce, unwavering gaze. This once, Ustin, she said. Salome was swept sideways again and found herself in a tiny room with featureless metal walls, so close between Ustin and Greavy that they could not help but touch her. She clasped her hands together so as not to give offense in return. The room lifted. Salome gasped. An elevator. It's for messengers, Greavy rumbled. And emergencies, added Ustin. I just hope we'll be in time. Perhaps this brief respite had been just what she needed because her leg took the weight better when she tested it. Here on the second floor, the open entrance of the elevator was covered with a curtain. Ustin stepped out but swiftly ducked back in again. People in the hall, Greavy, she said. Let's cross while we still have Samira's permission. Cross? Salome asked. She leaned on Greavy to enter the main hallway. Over there, beneath the arches, stood the cluster of men in question, strangers from other families with their Mbati. Even this far off, their raised voices sounded aggressive. Cabinet members, but they're still attended, said Ustin. I'm guessing we have maybe 3 minutes before they go in. Again, the 2 Mbati lifted her by the elbow, sweeping her across the hall, where Ustin lifted a curtain and let them through a door. Here the corridor was narrow and dim, and Greavy could only support her from behind. She tried to hurry in spite of the risk. She didn't belong here. What argument could Ustin possibly have used to justify allowing a hire like her into the servants' maze? Around a corner to the right was more light, through a series of windows on the left side. She gratefully used their stone sills to support herself, and then a door opened on her right. She could feel eyes staring down at her as she entered, but they were only the painted eyes of dead eminences. The room was empty. Ustin and Greavy helped her ensconce herself in one of the tall-backed brass chairs. Zaref's chair. It had none of his warmth or softness. Mistress, Ustin pressed a paper into her hand. These are the votes you will need to cast. The most important thing is you must say you occupy this seat for the first family. I'm representing the first family. Mistress, if you will, I occupy this seat. I occupy the seat for the first... Click! Ustin's gaze snapped to the main door. Faster than the turning handle, she leapt into the maze door and disappeared. Salome's heart flipped. She tried to swallow it back into place and keep breathing. 3 men walked in, conversing, then a 4th. The 5th man was the first to notice her. He was broad-bodied, golden skin, and bald as a stone. "Hello." That single word filled the chamber. "What are you doing here?" She thought of Mbati Ustin. "I occupy this seat for the first family." Now the other saw her. What? Who? Wait, wasn't she the lady who... Zaref's partner? What in Varen's name is she doing? I occupy this seat for the first family. I'm sorry, lady, you're going to have to leave, said the bald man. She grabbed the lower edges of the chair, winding her fingers through gaps in the brass. I occupy this seat for the first family. They were talking about her now, and more of them poured in every second. She couldn't see Fedron. Can we have her removed? But I mean the poor thing. This can't be serious. She'll go soon enough. What's this? Asked the Eminence Indal. He leaned on a cane of rich dark wood. His manservant, a single figure in black silk against the jeweled colors of the other men, murmured in his ear while they went to the head of the table. What's this? He sniffed through his noble nose and shifted his white and gold drape as he sat, and looked right at her. Salome lost her breath. No problem, Your Eminence. The heir waved his golden hand magnanimously. She's just grieving. We can ignore her. But cabinet business, objected a man with bulging eyes. Our main point of business is the empty seat. That was the bald man's resonant voice. That is why Speaker Orn pressured us to convene this meeting at such short notice. Salome closed her fist tighter until the brass hurt her fingers. I occupy. Fedron burst in the door with a desperate look on his face. This seat for the first family. Fedron gaped at her, panting. Salome, cousin? Somehow his presence stopped the words up in her throat. She shoved them out. I occupy this seat for the first family. Fedron deflated and fell into the chair beside her. Well, Hand of Siren. We should just get started, someone said. The manservant to the eminent struck reciting stance, his clear baritone cutting through any further murmurs of objection. I call to order this meeting of the Pelismar Cabinet and serve as a reminder of the Grobel Trust. Given to each according to need, the hand of the Grobel shall guide the 8 cities of Varen. So noted, said a red-faced man sitting at the eminence's right. First order of business acknowledging and certification of the empty seat, which is empty in spite of appearances. Salome took a breath, but it was no use. Hopeless certainty stole the words from her tongue. It was just as they said. They were ignoring her. While the men leaned forward to press buttons below the personal ordinator screens. Embedded into the table before them, her own screen, Zaref's screen, was dead. Dead love, dead hopes. The manservant to the eminence pulled a small device from his pocket, bowed and intoned. A unanimous vote is required to certify an empty seat. I count 1 vote in dissent. The seat remains occupied by the first family. Wait now, said the man with bulging eyes. 14-1? Fedron, you're not serious. Fedron folded his arms. Does that seat look empty to you? Salome looked at her cousin, but he didn't meet her gaze. The red-faced man beside the eminence gave a noisy sigh. The seat remains occupied in the presence of a legitimate substitute. Indal's Jex. You'll carry the cabinet's petition to the arbiter of the First Family Council to investigate the legitimacy of the substitute." The manservant to the eminence bowed. No animosity on his face, but Embody only showed feelings when they meant to, unlike the other cabinet members who scowled and scowled while Fedrin continued to avoid looking at her. Only the bald man with the big voice held pity in his face. They all argued about one topic after another. It went on so long that Salome's fingers cramped around the curled brass of her chair. She had to extricate them painfully and rub them together in her lap. She combed through the men's portentous words for the Indelis proposal, but in vain. The paper Ustin had given her proved useless, for the voting screen before her remained blank. "Right," declared the big-voiced man at last. "If there is no further business, the meeting shall adjourn." Seconded. Salome's heart shrank. She didn't dare protest into the silence that followed. The manservant to the eminence bowed again and intoned, "So it shall be. The meeting is adjourned." If the last 2 years hadn't trained her to move slowly, she might have tried to run from the room. Salome stood and pushed back her chair, swallowing grief. "That was some nerve," said a man somewhere to her left. "Get back to your children." She dropped her gaze, but her cheeks blazed. She watched the placement of her feet moving out from between the chairs. "Lady Salome, is it?" When she looked up, the heir was staring down at her. His face was young, handsome, chill as gold. "Yes." "You realize we've given you a gift." As he spoke, he stepped closer, looming over her. She shook her head. "Our patience, in the name of your bereavement. You know there are other ways to respond when someone disrupts cabinet business." My helper. Would he lay hands on her? Salome took a nervous step backward. Her left leg collapsed. She grasped for the nearest chair, felt fingers slip on the unkind brass, knocked her elbow, and hit the floor, the chair nearly coming down on top of her. She sat, immobilized by pain and shame, while the heir walked away without a backward glance. Gulps of air kept her from sobbing, but couldn't stop tears creeping onto her cheeks. "Cousin?" Fedrin crouched beside her. "Let me help you up." She nodded, pretended this was just a room, not a room full of eyes and sneers. Gritting her teeth, she got her right leg under her. With Fedrin's help, she managed to stand and limp to the door where the manservants were waiting. "Creevy," she said the moment she saw him, "I'll need you to make an appointment with that doctor, the one who was at Vol's." Greavy interposed himself beneath her arm, with a murmur of thanks for Fedrin and a cutting glance for Ustin. "Let me walk you home," Fedrin said. She hadn't expected that. They moved slowly at her limping pace, but a bigger surprise came in the spiral staircase where Fedrin allowed his manservant to pass him and turned to face her. "I'm grateful to you, cousin," he said. "What? Grateful?" Had she heard him right? "Sure, you were misguided, but that was a big favor you tried to do for the family. Someone overheard that we were inviting Gar back from Salimna to claim the seat at the next scheduled meeting, so they convened this one early, to certify it empty before he could get here." She couldn't tell whether to be flattered or insulted, and ended up mostly confused. "Gar and Temalera are coming back?" Fedrin rubbed his hand across his forehead. "Well, I'm afraid it's not so straightforward at this point." "What happened to the Indelis proposal?" A strange expression flashed across his face. "Don't you worry about that." How many times had she been told not to worry? "I do worry about it, cousin. That's why I was there." "Let me talk to Eric's first, all right? And then we'll discuss it." "We'd better." But she was too exhausted and hurt to argue. She needed Avon, she needed Pelly and Coram, just to hold them and cry, with no eyes watching. Salome screamed and woke. A nightmare, not of wandering in darkness this time, but of standing exposed in sunlight under the judging eyes of Father Varon himself. She panted while her heart slowed, rubbing her coverlet to remind her hands of soft silk and reality. Her body came into focus. Everything hurts. Each bruise that woke to identify itself roused another horrible memory of the cabinet meeting. She couldn't force those events into sense no matter how many times she tried. She called. Ustin? The Embati woman didn't appear, but then she probably wasn't expecting to be called because Salome's throat closed. She looked away from the place where Zareth should have lain. Deliberately, she rearranged her pillows and pushed herself back to sit. Mercy, it hurt. But how much worse might it have been without Greavy's care? She tried again, though her voice quavered. Embati Ustin, may I speak with you? Ustin emerged this time so silently she might have come wisp-like straight through the wall. She wore a black silk dress that showed off her muscular shoulders, not the suit she had normally worn on duty. Mistress? This was already all wrong. I'm very sorry, Salome said. It's not fair of me to demand you call me mistress now, is it? Ustin bowed. A single pale braid swung forward of her shoulder. Lady Salome. Salome inhaled what calm she could manage. I went to the cabinet meeting, but it went so badly. I wonder if I might discuss it with you. Ustin's sober silence felt like disapproval, though her face didn't change. If you consent to advise me, I'll pay you for your time. I am willing, lady, Ustin replied. Unfortunately, I have a very incomplete picture of what happened, having been limited to what Grobel Fedrin told us and what I could overhear from other members leaving. Well, we can start with what Fedrin said. He said the meeting was called an emergency because Gar and Tamalera were coming back from Selimna. How would they have anything to do with anything? Lady, are you aware that the seat my master held was at large? The term wasn't entirely unfamiliar. I'd heard that. It means he's... She gulped down a pang. He was not the only First Family cabinet member. Yes, lady. Each of the 12 great families is assigned a single inalienable seat. Beyond that, only 2 seats remain. In those, any family's representative may sit. But we happen to hold it. She closed fists, remembering her fingers tangled in the chair. And they wanted to declare it empty, but I was sitting in it. Another piece fell into its slot. That's what Cousin Gar was supposed to do. Sit in the seat so Fedrin wouldn't have to admit it was empty. Lady, Ustin said, I'm sure you know that any competition among 12 families for a single empty seat would be fierce. That was an understatement. Salome nodded. The cabinet rushed to meet so that Gar would come too late. They would all have been itching to fight one another, but then I was there. They tried to pretend I wasn't, except Fedrin said I was. Why would he? She patted down the question with both hands. No, of course he would. He had to have been in a panic when he thought that they'd outmaneuvered him. That face he'd made arriving in the seat beside her? The corner of Ustin's mouth twitched slightly upward. Salome chose to interpret that as approval. But I still don't see how any of this has anything to do with the Indelis proposal. I was listening. It was never even mentioned. A shadow of something strangely like sadness flitted across Ustin's face. Lady, no vote can occur if a proposal has no sponsor. The men didn't care. Not even Fedrin had sustained his sponsorship once tragedy struck. I could have sponsored it if I'd known, she said. I thought I was there to cast his vote, but that's why you brought me as a sponsor, is it? Ustin didn't immediately respond. Salome braced herself for, I don't know, but then the embodied answered, Lady, You recall we were jointly involved in a conversation about the seriousness of the risks Grobel ladies face. I continue to share my master's belief in the proposal's benefits for ladies and their children. For me, and for my children. But that a law to protect her, she'd have men approaching her constantly. And how could she refuse to entertain partnership arrangements that the family council might propose? I could still sponsor it, she said. Fedrin has acknowledged me in the seat. Only once the words were out did their shuddering import take shape. To do that, I would have to claim to be a legitimate cabinet member. It perfectly explained Fedrin's ambivalence. The family still wants Gar there. Ustin nodded. Lady, we can be certain of that. Grobel Gar is a man of influence, and was the first family council's choice of substitute. However, the cabinet bylaws which allow a family to provide a substitute imply that said substitute shall then fill the seat on a permanent basis. They imply... Oh, nash it, Ustin. That's why the Eminence is sending his man to the first family council. He thinks I've claimed the seat. Ustin's face remained impassive. Technically, lady, you have. And that's why Fedrin wants to talk to Eric's. Maybe I saved the seat, but I just delayed their problem. And then I fell down and embarrassed myself in front of everyone? That seemed to startle Ustin. Lady, you fell? I'm sorry. The shame flooded back. Salome pressed her hands to her face, shaking her head. If I hadn't had to rush there, or if I'd just been holding on to something. The luck-bringer's hand is not always kind. Her mother had often said so. Salome instinctively raised her head for the traditional response. But blessed Siren sees far and does not explain his choices. She sighed. That is why my Greavy will be taking me to the medical center today. As if recognizing her need, Greavy stepped out from beneath his curtain and bowed respectfully. Good morning, mistress. Allow me to dress you for your appointment. Yes, thank you, Greavy. Ustin, you may be excused. Thank you for your help. The Embati woman bowed and withdrew. Mistress, Greavy said gruffly, if you wish Ustin to advise you, perhaps you should inquire. But I did. I asked her in, Salome said. I did offer to pay her. Greavy looked down at his hands silently for several seconds. At last he said, Mistress, I believe you requested to see Dr. Cartoonin Wint, who confirmed Grobel Pyaris at his party. Yes. Please be aware that we'll have to go a little farther than the medical center for your appointment. Oh, all right. Vol kept a doctor outside the medical center, but perhaps Wint was worth it. She certainly had made an impression at the party. After she was dressed and had eaten breakfast with the family, Salome assured the children she'd be home soon, with extra kisses for Avon and Pelly, and she and Greavy walked across the gravel paths of the residence gardens to the conveyor's hall. Salome winced with every step. 37 should have been too young to walk like an old woman. It should have been too young to be widowed, too. Her former self dragged at her, the Salome who had run and hidden behind that carefully tended hedge on her right, joined by a handsome man who gently kissed her amid the voluptuous scent of imported surface soil. It made her too conscious of the effort Greavy must be expending to keep her steady, to keep her moving, and conscious, too, of strange glances he cast toward her. Was he unhappy? She watched him. In the conveyor's hall, Greavy seated her in a chair by the stone wall. He left the green-carpeted reception zone, crossing the road that passed under the hall's massive entrance arch and ended against the wall to her left. The zone beyond was crowded with vehicles of varying sizes. Greavy procured a one-passenger skimmer from the household staff and adjusted its control column to upright for a standing driver. Then he came and fetched her to it, slowing attentively at the spot where carpet met stone. He was always thoughtful. He didn't engage the skimmer's repulsion until she was fully settled. If he had some complaint, she couldn't detect it. Driving felt quite normal. The skimmer hummed. The cool wind of their passage refreshed her, and outside the gate of the residence grounds, broad circumferences busy with vehicles and colorful lower pedestrians made a pleasant distraction. Greavy accelerated up a steep rampway of reinforced limestone that lifted them above slate roofs and through the bore to the 4th level. In this neighborhood, the cavern roof hung much lower. Greavy turned their skimmer into an outbound radius, and then into a circumference where the building facades formed a continuous wall on either side. The road ended against a melted limestone column as broad as a storefront. Above the roofs of the building, the slope of another level rampway was visible, passing up and behind the column's ancient mass. Greavy brought the skimmer to a stop. Its hum faded, and it sank to rest on the stone. The front wall of their destination had high oblong windows and bore chromed script identifying Doctors Wint, Albar, and Sedman. A bright globe lamp, green as the sphere of Hyle, goddess of health, hung above glass front doors. Salome took Greavy's arm, passing a pair of wisps that drifted along the sidewalk and entered through the glass doors that parted before them. The crowd in the room within plunged into silence. Only a small boy with the case-mark necklace of a Malumalai merchant continued to run in circles until he nearly tripped over Greavy's feet, then looked up and bawled in terror. His father rushed up, gaped helplessly at Salome for a second, then turned to Greavy and blurted, "May your honorable service earn its just reward, Mbati, sir," before scooping the boy up and hiding behind a large group of thick-belted Venerai. The Venerai had the look of farmers. All were muscular, with striking sun-marked skin. One older man looked bright red, and a couple young women were covered with brown spots, and the rest were solid brown. They were all embracing each other, and she couldn't guess which one was here to see a doctor. Maybe the red one? An inner door opened. 2 cartoonin men emerged. Both wore green lip paint and gray medical coats. The taller of them made a different approach to 2 embodied mothers and their child. The shorter one came up to Salome and bowed. "Lady Salome, if you will please follow me," he bade. He made a second bow to Greavy, but did not greet him. He led the 2 of them back through the door, paused a moment to key a sequence on a wall panel, then took them down a long bare hall and opened a numbered door. Dr. Cartoonin Wint stood in the room within. Salome recognized her instantly, though this time the style of her gray coat was more functional. She had the same red hair tied in a knot behind her head. She bowed. "My practice is honored by your patronage, Lady Salome." "Dr. Wint, I was surprised not to find you at the medical center," Salome admitted. "Greavy, you may undress me now." "Yes, mistress," he began, undoing her buttons. "Lady, I did work at the medical center," Wint replied. "But after the death of Lady Indelis, I couldn't bear to stay. Administrator Vole nonetheless has maintained his family's relationship with me, for which I am grateful." "I'm sure that was a terrible tragedy." That Vole would continue to bring his family to her spoke eloquently for the doctor's skills. Salome pulled her hands out of her sleeves and raised them over her head. "May I ask what brings you here, lady?" "My leg. I fell yesterday." Greavy lifted the gown off her. She lost the doctor for a moment behind layers of silk. When Salome glimpsed her again, Wint still looked inquisitive. "Well, I stepped back on it and fell. I'd been overusing it, pushing through pain earlier in the day, and you said at the party I should seek a cartoonin therapist." Wint blushed and glanced at Greavy. "I did, lady." "So," she indicated her own body, "please proceed." "Lady, would you consent to lie face down on this table?" "Of course." With Greavy's help, she climbed to the padded surface. The slick material was cold on her right cheek and all down her body. What kind of injury was this, lady? Birth injury. All right, that's what I thought. How far down your leg does the pain go? Does it go below your knee? Yes. Have you had any bowel problems or incontinence, lady? No, thank Kyle. Fever or weight loss? No. What forms of treatment or testing have you previously pursued, lady? Greavy, please tell her. While Greavy explained the tests and treatments she'd received in the medical center and the therapies thereafter, the doctor examined her back, rear, and legs. She pressed firmly, but did manage to avoid the bruises from the fall. She then followed that up with some kind of pricking tool. Thank you, Embody, sir, Wince said, when Greavy had finished. May your honorable service earn its just reward. Lady, can you please stand for me? When she was standing, Wind asked her to lift her leg, straighten her knee, lift her big toe, and stand on her toes. It went decently. It was hard to know if she should hope to perform better or worse. Doctor, Salome asked, what do you think? Can you fix it? The doctor pinched her own forehead with her thumb and forefinger. I'm afraid it's too early to say, lady. I'd like to recommend a course of exercises and request that you undergo further tests. Salome's mouth fell open in dismay. But this is like starting over. I thought... What had she thought? That Wint would have Hale's hands, to heal with a touch? That if her leg could be fixed, it would change the past? Nothing would erase the sight of her fall from the cabinet members' memories. Nothing could bring Zareth back. The truth tried to drown her. Salome gulped air, struggling to stay above it, and covered her face with both hands. It was dark in the space between them. It was dark in the space behind them, warm and damp. She did not want to cry in front of the doctor. Greavy said softly, I'm here to protect you, mistress. Salome swallowed hard. Doctor, she managed. I'd like to get dressed. Of course, lady. The layers of silk gave her a moment's privacy. She could focus on her hands and her sleeves and speak as if this were about someone else. Of course you'd want tests, doctor. Here I am walking in and you don't know me or my case. I'm sure Greavy could have the medical center send over what we've already done. I probably should resume therapy, probably. Should never have stopped. Childish of me, really. I'm sorry I can't do more today, lady, the doctor said. However, there may be one way to prevent falls while we pursue long-term improvement. Might I suggest a cane? Salome blinked at her for a few seconds. Then it occurred to her. The Eminence Indal carries a cane. Does he indeed, lady? He takes it into the cabinet meetings. The doctor bowed. 2 doors down from here is a shop where you might be able to find something suitable. Thank you, doctor. I'll look, and I'll get back to you. Greavy had finished his work at just the right moment. She took his arm. Thank you, lady. I'll send you a report on what we've discussed and a list of suggested actions. I'll look forward to it. Salome walked on Greavy's arm out through the main hall, hurrying through the waiting room, so as to cause a minimum of disturbance to the lowers there. It wasn't difficult to find the shop Dr. Wint had suggested. It was staffed by a cartoonin and carried a variety of medical devices. None of the canes here were made of wood, but that only made sense. This was not a neighborhood which could support such high prices. There was a bin of black canes, but they seemed too embody. Another bin held aluminum canes, but they seemed too low. Salome scanned a glass case of artist-design canes, intended for cartoonin, until she found a graceful one which did not use Hale's green in its design. Purchase this one if you would, Greavy. Greavy looked down at his hands, clasped before his waist, and said quietly, Mistress, must you purchase a cane? Sorry? I can accompany you at parties if you wish, even if the rooms are crowded. Oh, no. That was why he was unhappy. This morning she'd asked Ustan for advice before she even called for him. She'd asked Cartoon and Wint for medical assistance that Greavy had always provided. And now buying a cane meant she wouldn't need him for walking either. For the first time she understood what he'd said. If you wish Ustin to advise you, perhaps you should inquire. He didn't mean ask, he meant write an employment inquiry. That was uncharacteristic sharpness for him, but now that she thought about it, he must have been upset ever since that first day when Ustin approached her during Pelly's nap. I'm sorry, Greavy, she said. You serve me well and always have. Please don't worry. Ladies don't hire gentlemen's servants. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath. If I may presume, mistress. Please. Ladies don't attend cabinet meetings either. That was a disaster, Greavy. Mistress, if you differ, Greavy, please tell me. You have now attended 2 meetings, mistress, more than any other lady can say. In neither case did you flee, and your persistence has won you the provisional support of the First Family's cabinet member. Your intelligence is certainly a match to Master Zareth's, a long suspicion of mine that was confirmed when you spoke to Ustin this morning. If you are to continue in this, you will need her services more than mine, but I do wish to know one thing. His honesty was sobering, almost frightening. She whispered, What's that? Is this your wish, mistress? Emotion colored his voice on that phrase, and he bowed his head. I have vowed myself to your service, vowed to make your wishes my own. And if this is your wish, so let it be. But please be sure. How could she answer when she wasn't sure of anything anymore, even her next footstep? Thank you, Greavy, she said. I don't know. I just don't know. Greavy bowed. If you will excuse me a moment, I'll purchase the cane. Of course she'd been summoned before the arbiter of the First Family Council. Of course she had. The letter delivered by Eric's Quarme had made her feel sick to her stomach. Now she squeezed her fear into it with one sweaty hand, taking care not to hurt Greavy with the other as they walked. Salome turned Ustin's excellent political advice over and over in her head, but there was no guarantee Eric's would listen. Chances were he'd scold her and send her home to grieve. They reached the hallway. Eric's office was across from Fedron's. At her back she could feel Zareth's office whispering of emptiness. She shivered, squeezed Greavy's hand, and knocked on the arbiter's office door. The door swung silently inward. Lady Salome, intoned Eric's Quarme from behind the door. Come in, cousin. Eric stood before his desk with fingers tented against his lips. He gestured to a cushioned chair. Please sit down. Gnash it. Gnash all of it. She let herself be led to the seat and seated in it. If she hadn't feared her leg might fail her, she might have preferred to face Eric's nose to nose. On the other hand, his position of family authority lent him more magnitude than his physical size. Salome clasped her hand tightly around her left wrist, sharp rubies pressed into her skin. My blood is precious. The family doesn't deserve my life. Eric's leaned back on the front edge of his desk. I've been thinking about you and your family in this difficult time, he said. How have you been feeling? She didn't trust this kindness. I'm coping. And how are the children? She almost told him. The boys were suffering most after the loss of their parent and mentor. Zareth had been less close to the older girls, so they were less affected, while Pelly was sad, but didn't truly understand. But this was a distraction, possibly even a trap. As well as can be expected, given the circumstances. Eric's waited, testing her with silence. Salome stared at her hands, at a single sparkling ruby drop that had escaped her grip and outlasted him. Eric's cleared his throat. Cousin, I received a messenger from the Eminence Indal yesterday. Do you know what he came to ask me?" She nodded, but kept her eyes on the sparkling ruby as if it were a wisp that could give her good luck. "In fact, I was shocked," Eric said. "Indal's Jack stayed for several minutes to pressure me into providing an immediate answer, and I might have if I hadn't already spoken to Fedrin. He told me to wait." Salome spoke softly. "Cousin Fedrin understands the bind the first family is in." "He does," Eric's agreed automatically. Then he twitched as if he'd suddenly awakened. "Do you?" Salome's heart banged inside her chest. She tried to keep her breath level and hold Ustin's advice steady in her mind. "The bind the first family is in," she said slowly. "Yes. I understand that the family failed to deliver its chosen substitute to a critical meeting, and that if I hadn't been there, we would no longer have any claim to the seat. At the same time, I realize it would be very difficult at this point for us to sue for permission to seat a second replacement." The arbiter clearly hadn't expected her to answer. He seemed flustered for a second, then resumed his scolding. "In fact, Salome, we could be embroiled in the courts for years because of you." "Because of me?" she asked. "Not because the family couldn't keep quiet about their plan to bring Cousin Gar back from Solemna?" Eric's frowned. "Who told you that?" Ustin would have said, "I don't know." "Isn't it public?" she asked. "Speaker Orn informed every member of the cabinet. If I hadn't attended the meeting, the third and fifth families would be using their connections to the heir and the eminence to bully their way into our seat right now." She shifted with a deep breath, readying for a risk. "And actually, there's no need for any legal dispute." "That's where you're wrong, cousin. Every family has an interest in ousting us. They've wanted to see the first family weakened for years." Her racing heart tried to leap out of her throat, but she'd said it. "They can't do anything if I become the first family's cabinet member." "You're not serious." Salome released her wrist and leaned forward. "Cousin, let me try. It would keep us out of legal trouble. The others in the cabinet might let me stay because they'll think the first family has been weakened." She couldn't help a bitter laugh. "Especially after I fell down in front of the heir." Eric's stared. For a moment she thought she had reached him, but then he shook his head. "This isn't you talking, cousin. You know the right things to say, but you must have learned them from someone else." Oh, nash it. She didn't speak the words out loud, but in her blood anger burned with the heat of Father Varen. "I am being advised by Imbati Ustin," she said, "in precisely the same way that you are advised by your Quarme." Eric's glanced at his manservant. Imbati Quarme stood coiled and still, her face expressionless. "My Quarme is a gentleman's servant," Eric said. "So is Imbati Ustin." "By tradition, but there's no law saying she can't be mine. It would be quite simple for me to compose an inquiry." And Greavy's earnestness had convinced her of one thing. The Imbati Service Academy would witness the contract without objection. Eric started to reply, thought better of it, then circled behind his desk and leaned one hand on it, frowning. With the other, he started flipping through the stack of thick papers. "You understand, I'm sure, that I represent the family, and it's my job to know what's best for you," he said. "I would expect you to know that promoting the race must come before our personal desires. It's clear you're feeling much better, and I'm glad of that. In fact, you were always quick in recovery. We should take advantage of that going forward." Now she recognized the papers and felt Varen's heat drain out of her. Gods have mercy. Those were partnership solicitations. Elinda's gentle breath raised hairs on her neck, cold as the space between stars. This was an entirely different fight, one in which she stood alone. Zareth could no longer claim her. The law he'd written to protect her was powerless. Nothing Ustin had said was remotely relevant Indeed, how could it be? Even Greavy, who always swore to protect her, could do nothing here. He could only wait and hope to keep her alive after she'd already been used. Tears pricked in her eyes. She'd been here before, sitting in just a chair in another office a few doors down the hall. The arbiter of the Fourth Family Council had smiled at her paternally, indifferent to her fear of eager and powerful older men. He'd told her what Eric's told her own Enziel not long ago. What he was telling her now, that she should be grateful at the prospect of a partnership that would sever her from her parents and every cousin she had ever trusted. There was a difference this time. Eric's wasn't sending her out. He was trying to keep her in. "I still have a family, you know," she said. Eric's made a small, tight grimace, not exactly a smile. "That won't be a problem." Salome closed both fists. "I'm afraid it will." "Please, cousin, let's be serious. These men are—" Salome stood up. "Yes, let's be serious. I have no partner in the First Family, and that means I'm not your cousin." "What?" "I belong to the Fourth Family." Eric's waved hands at her. "Salome, you can't mean that. Your children are First Family. Surely you wouldn't wish to be separated from them." "I don't," she agreed. "But I wouldn't be. At least not while the suit remained, embroiled, as you say, in the courts. I imagine that could take quite a long while. I'm 37 now. So many things could happen while you waste your resources on a legal fight. I could lose my fertility. I could die. I could make public statements regarding the dealings of the First Family." To see him twitch gave her shameful pleasure. "Or you could set those papers aside and write a letter to the Eminence Indal informing him that I am Zareth's legitimate replacement." "Oh, crown of my," Eric swore. He sank back into his chair, shaking his head, but he did move the pile of papers to one side and took up a pen and a blank sheet. Salome watched him write without moving. "Greavy," she whispered. Greavy moved closer, though he kept a cautious distance from Eric's Quarme. He watched until Eric's folded the paper and instructed Quarme to deliver it, then returned to his station behind her shoulder. When Quarme had left the office, Eric sighed. "You're right in one sense. It would save me a great deal of trouble. It won't work, though. They'll never let you keep it." Salome stood up, straightened her skirts, and took Greavy's arm. "I guess. We'll see." Salome walked by herself, place the cane at the same time as the left foot, shift weight, then step onto the right foot and move the cane forward. She'd worked her way up from the private drawing room to the sitting room, then the bedroom and the dining room with its chairs, until she even tried walking around Pelly's room. That proved quite the challenge, since Pelly loved the shiny cane and danced around her, making wild sounds of delight, and it gave her a confidence she hadn't expected. Her second turn around the sitting room, however, felt like procrastination. Coram and Avon would be home from school soon, and she had to face some uncomfortable conversations. Would Brinks be angry if she interrupted his work? Would he hate her for trying to take Zareth's place? And how could she dismiss her Greavy, who had always stood by her, especially when she didn't know if this would last? Click, swish. The front door. It was still too early for the children, unless someone was ill. She held her breath. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brinks," came the first houseman's voice. "Brinks!" Salome cried. "Is everything all right?" Brinks walked in through the vestibule curtain with a strange look on his face. "Mother, Petron just sent me home saying I needed to talk to you. He said there was some important news for the family, but you had to be the one to tell me." "Oh, Brinks, treasure." Adrenaline tingled through her spine. in her fingertips. "What's going on? Are you taking a partner?" "No, Treasure, it's not that. It's a bit more unprecedented." He stared at her for a second. "Unprecedented? Is that why everyone's acting so weird about this? Even Eric's wouldn't say a word, and I can always get him to say something." Salome took the leap. "Treasure, I'm going to be taking your father's seat in the cabinet meetings this afternoon, representing the First Family." "What?" "And Fedrin and Eric's will be supporting me. I hope." Brinks was rarely speechless, but this time she appeared to have overwhelmed him. His attempts to respond flashed wildly across his face, one after the other. "May Siren grant that he not conclude in anger." "Please understand," she said. "It's for the Indelis proposal. Your father and I designed it." The words touched the unhealed wound in her heart. Her voice quavered. "I couldn't bear to let Zareth's last gift to us vanish without defending it." "Oh," Brinks exclaimed, and his face melted. "Oh, Mother, yes, of course, it's for Father." He came close, wrapping his arms around her without another word. Under her cheek, his chest heaved, his arms tightened, and he gave a ragged gasp. The grief he'd been trying to hide burst out, powerful as the river Endro beneath the city. "Oh, my treasure," she murmured. She closed her eyes and rubbed his back with her free hand, riding the river with him while he sobbed. When she opened them again, she discovered Avon and Coram had come home without her noticing, and now stood by the vestibule curtain, staring at them, perhaps in shock at seeing the eldest in tears. Salome beckoned them into the embrace, and for a time they all held one another. Then she cleared her throat. "Let's hang the globe." Brinks released her slowly and put his arm around Corin. Avon took Salome's hand. They walked together through the double doors into the private drawing room. Here the moon yellow of morning was everywhere. Scarves had been draped over couches and chairs, and though the gifts had been opened, the hundreds of yellow cards that had accompanied them still hung along the stone walls. In the days since the funeral, the household had installed a wire that dangled from the stone vault of the ceiling in one corner. Someone had also clearly been listening behind the walls just now, because no sooner than they all entered than Imbati Uston and Imbati Grivi emerged from the master bedroom. Uston set up a stepladder beneath the wire, while Grivi brought the globe in its wooden box and held it out to Salome with a bow. "Pelly?" Salome called. "Can you come out, big girl?" The doors to the girls' rooms opened, and Pelly trotted out with her Verid, following behind her. "Mama?" "We're going to hang the globe for your father," Salome explained. "It's fragile, and we're going to be very careful." "Careful." Pelly trotted up and patted Salome's skirts as softly as she did her sleeping sister, laying her cheek against the silk. She then proceeded to do the same to Brinks's leg and Coram and Avon. Salome opened the box that Grivi still held. She extracted the globe from its padded nest, careful to protect the hook and wire attachment dangling from the top. She lifted it to her lips and kissed the engraved glass twice, once for Enziel and once for herself. Then she passed it to Brinks for a kiss, and he passed it to Coram. Avon took it for herself, and then held it out for Pelly, with Imbati Verid standing attentively by. Pelly leaned her white cheek to it and whispered, "Cold." Avon brought it back then, but Salome shook her head. "Thank you, darling, but I can't use the ladder. Brinks, will you hang it?" Brinks nodded. He climbed the 3 steps and reached up. The globe had to be hung higher than the carven cornices, or it would not appropriately represent a star, and attached the hook and wire. The element at the center of the globe lit, dimmer than a wisp, promising neither cheer nor fortune, only a solemn, enduring reminder. "Thank you," said Salome. She kissed them, eldest to youngest, each one so alive, so precious, so fragile. I'm sorry, but I need to ask you to stay out of the sitting room for a few minutes. I have to go out at 4, and I'd like to speak with Greavy and Uston in private before I go." The 2 servants walked out with her. Surely they knew what this was about. Surely they could see how she dreaded it. She didn't sit down, but faced them with her back to Zareth's office door. Greavy was the broader of the 2, his strength evident even through his formal manservant's suit. Uston stood out for her height, the muscles of her arms hidden inside long black sleeves. The similarity of their bodyguard stances hid the fundamental differences in training that made this conversation necessary. "You both know what I'm going to do," Salome said. "You know it's crazy. I don't know if it'll work." Uston nodded acknowledgement. Greavy remained motionless. "I'm going to try once more to represent the first family on the Eminence's cabinet." Saying it sent a rush of cold behind her ears. "This time they won't be confused. I won't have any benefit of the doubt. If I make any errors, or even if I don't, they may vote me out. Therefore, I would like to request that Uston act as my manservant just for this afternoon." "I am willing," said Uston. "Greavy?" Greavy said nothing. "I'm so sorry, Greavy," said Salome. "I don't want to be unfair to you. You've always been faithful. You have kept me upright so many times, truthfully. You have kept me alive, but I have to try this." Greavy's reply was barely more than a whisper. "Mistress, you witnessed my vow of service. Please understand how difficult it is for me to watch you put yourself in danger." "I do understand, but if I let you protect me now, I won't be able to protect anyone else. This isn't just for the sake of my own life or even my daughters' lives, but for all the ladies of the race. I have to try to pass the Indelis proposal. This is my wish." Greavy bowed. "So let it be, then. May I be excused?" "Yes. I'm really sorry." A good deal of her courage departed with him. "Just for this afternoon," she'd said, but it still felt final. In good conscience, she'd have to consent to release Greavy from his contract if he requested it, even if she failed. She walked slowly to the nearest couch and sat down, staring at the Quaros board without really seeing it. "I don't know how to do this, Uston. I'm not Zareth." "Mistress, let's focus on today," said Uston. "You're correct in your concern. It's more than likely the cabinet will again attempt to declare the seat empty. Fedron supported you in the last vote, and I imagine he will support you again, but we can't be certain he won't have come under outside influence up to and including blackmail. For this, and for the Indelis proposal, you'll need to cultivate allies." "Fedron is it, though," Salome shook her head. "Unless he can bring allies of his own. I don't know any of the others. Who is the bald man, the one with the big voice? He was kinder than most of them." "That is Cabinet Secretary Boros of the second family, mistress. He had a cordial relationship with Master Zareth. They spoke often, and occasionally co-sponsored proposals. He would make an excellent ally. His good opinion is respected." "What am I supposed to do, though? Invite him to tea?" "I don't believe there's time for that just now, mistress. We should be going, so we don't have to hurry." All right. Perhaps she'd practiced too much walking today. The way to the meeting felt interminable. The cane was awkward in the cramped spiral stairway. When she reached the top, Salome realized how far they still had to go and huffed in frustration. How did Zareth ever do this? "It's true the walking was easier for him, mistress, but you must remember he didn't do the job alone. He had 4 assistants. She couldn't imagine having assistants. And he had you." "Yes, mistress." They passed the heir's sweet, merciful hail, "Please don't let the heir come out and see me," and entered the hallway. Several men stood not far ahead, cabinet members. She was starting to recognize some of them. "Tell me who they are, Uston," she whispered. "Well, you know the Secretary Boros, Behind him is Amiel of the 9th family, one of Master Zaref's allies. Beside him, Carides of the 8th family. The men stiffened and grew quiet as they drew closer. Salome held tighter to the handle of her cane, placed it more carefully, stepped in measured cadence with her head high. The door was just beyond them. She'd have to walk between Secretary Boros and Palamene of the 3rd family. Palamene was leering at her, holding something in his hand. It looked like a glass, but he didn't hold it like a drink. Still several steps away from them, she hesitated. "Excuse me, gentlemen." "Good afternoon, Lady Salome," said Boros. Palamene took a single step forward. Ustin flashed past her, and for a split second she thought she'd attacked Palamene. The 3rd family man grunted and stumbled backwards. His manservant feinted toward Ustin, but then backed off also. Salome clung to her cane, her heart pounding. Ustin returned. She'd taken the glass. Salome didn't like the look of its brownish contents. "My apologies, lady." Boros looked between her and Palamene, frowning. "I think we should go in," he said. "Lady Salome, will you come with me?" He offered his elbow. "Thank you," she said, but placed both hands on her cane until his arm dropped. Then she followed him in, noticing that Ustin still blocked Palamene from approaching her. It was alarming, and felt worse because Ustin had to stay behind on the threshold. Salome ignored the staring eyes of the ancient eminences, refusing to rest just because so many men were coming in around her, and walked steadily to Zaref's chair. Her chair. May willing. Ignoring hissing insults, she leaned her cane against the table, carefully pulled the chair out, and sat down. She almost wound her hands in the chair again, but this time folded them in her lap. She tried to barricade her ears against the whispers and waited for Fedrin to take the seat beside her. "Just stay calm. Just stay." Fedrin was late. Well, after the heir and eminence had already been seated, he backed in the door, harried by another man who must have been yelling at him for some time. She heard only, "If you know what's good for Varen in the race," before the man relented and went to a seat. She counted the chairs. He was 5th family. Fedrin grunted and took the chair beside her with scarcely a glance in her direction. "Let's get started," said red-faced Speaker Orn. The manservant to the eminence intoned his ceremonial speech. Before the final words were fully out, the 5th family man stood up. "First order of business must be the empty seat." Fedrin grasped the edge of the table with one hand. "The seat is occupied. We already voted on this in the last session." "You're pathetic, 1st family," the man retorted. "You fail to bring your substitute. You bring us—" He waved a hand at Salome. "This, instead. You're trying to cling to power after the battle's already lost. Well, no one's laughing." While he spoke, his gaze never left Palamene of the 3rd family, as if everyone else were just the audience for an impending confrontation between them. "I agree," Palamene said. "Let's vote on the empty seat." The heir said softly, "Your Eminence?" The Eminence sniffed through his noble nose. "I agree. We should vote." Salome shivered. This was entrapment, carefully planned, Quaros pieces precisely placed. The heir was 3rd family, and the Eminence was 5th. Those 2 families and their representatives would have spent days since the last meeting wearing down the other cabinet members. How many had been harassing Fedrin? How long would he endure this for the sake of a female cousin? "Fine," said Speaker Orn. "Cast your votes." She couldn't watch then. These were men with years of history between them, layer upon layer of alliances and schemes, and here she'd been dropped into it blindfolded. The manservant to the eminence examined his vote reporting device and bowed. "A unanimous vote is required to certify an empty seat. I count 6 votes in dissent. The seat remains occupied by the 1st family." Had she heard that right? 6? For a split second she glimpsed the Quaros pattern. herself standing upon her post with Vedran beside her, third and fifth families attempting to surround them, but behind their backs another, contrary configuration. Someone hadn't been paying attention to the rest of the board. Vedran emitted a ridiculous sound like a strangled giggle. He cleared his throat. Well, I'm glad that's settled. Turn on her voting screen, please. The square screen lit in front of her, an instant flash of green, then black, with a green date indicator in the upper left corner. In the upper right corner it read, Zareth of the First Family. Salome stiffened, bracing for the wash of grief, but by Alinda's grace she felt only warmth. Thank you, she whispered. Salome watched Vedran as they proceeded to business. His near eyebrow would rise, and he'd cast her a glance, then move his finger to the vote button. It wasn't difficult, though at times it was tricky to tell when the procedural vote had been called for. Slowly her muscles unclenched. She tried to read the potential for allyship in the expressions on the men's faces, golden or pale. She counted chairs and identified the fourth family's cabinet member. He would be a cousin, and she should try to reach out to him, perhaps through his lady. Then the seventh family's member brought a proposal. She stared at him unabashedly, trying to remember every word he'd used. Pursuant to our discussions, I move for a vote on the Selimnar imports proposal. Pursuant and move. These were the keys she needed. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. A wisp drifted into the room impudently through an ancient eminence's face. Let your luck come to me, Wisp. Vedran leaned to her. The first family supports the Selimnar imports proposal, he whispered. Salome nodded and pressed the correct button. She waited for the manservant to the eminence to make his announcement of the vote result, and said it. Blood hummed in her ears. She hoped her voice wouldn't crack. Pursuant to our discussions, I move for a vote on the Indelis proposal, in memory of Zareth of the First Family. Discomfort shifted through the men. Someone down the table to her left muttered, Varen's teeth. But many faces fell solemn at mention of Zareth, and those men might support her. One of them was Bald-Head's secretary, Boros. I'll second, said Vedran. On the screen in front of her, the words appeared, Indelis proposal brought by Zareth of the First Family. She pressed her button in support. For you, love. The manservant to the eminence bowed. I count 4 votes in support, 12 in dissent. The measure is retired. Salome sat unable to breathe for several seconds. She wanted to scream or run, but this was no longer blood in her veins. It was some awful distillation of grief and shame. The air tasted of dust. Vedran nudged her. Salome, next vote, support. These were someone else's hands, fingers pressed to the table surface in front of her. No, they were hers, just impossible to move. Next vote, support. She forced one up, pressed the button, made herself heartless, a machine to act at Vedran's instructions while passing seconds pulled her inexorably away from the moment when it should have gone right. No rockfall could have crushed her heart more utterly than this failure. Salome lay exhausted on her bed, feeling its beat inside her chest, wondering why it still persisted. She'd failed to save Enzil and Kier from the duties that would inevitably tear their bodies apart. She'd failed to save Lien from the draining obligation that had so embittered her sister. The race's decline ground on. Loved ones were plucked away, and one day only Pyras would remember his mother's name. Mistress, said Ustin quietly. Salome heaved a sigh. What is it, Ustin? If you permit me to hear what happened, I may be able to advise you. The suggestion was made mildly enough, but anger flashed inside her. Salome pushed up on an elbow. You're always one step ahead, aren't you? She said. Here I've been thinking you guess what I want before I do, but really you plan this whole thing. Why would you push me? Was it so you could wield power by being close to a cabinet member? Uston replied coolly. I have served a cabinet member already for 12 years, mistress. My master cannot speak for me, but I believe he would vouch for the quality of my service. For more, you would have to contact the Service Academy. I am certain they could quickly find me other employment. Guilt quenched her anger. Of course, the Service Academy would stand by Uston's certification, and naturally someone who had been privy to the First Family's cabinet secrets would be a coveted prize for a new employer. Zareth had said she does her job too well. Even now, Salome couldn't see how serving well could be a flaw. She sat up. My fault, she said. I shouldn't have accused you. I remember you saying you believed in the goals of the Indelis proposal. I shouldn't be surprised that you'd want me to carry out Zareth's plan once he was gone. Uston's brows rose, arching her manservant's mark. Mistress, I shall presume? Salome steeled herself. When Greavy had taken her in confidence, it had been shocking enough, but Uston was a formidable weapon intended for gentlemen, her loyalty pledged to no one. Please do. Mistress, the Indelis proposal was entirely your idea, Uston said. If you recall, I was not welcome at the confirmation party for your small cousin, but I stayed in the maze and listened in case I was needed, and I heard what you said to the gentlemen of the First Family Council. She struck reciting stance, one hand held behind her back. Some of us are giving our efforts while others are giving up our health, and others, like Lady Indelis, have given their lives. I imagine you could think of some way to protect our mothers better. Aren't you all men of importance? Nay's truth, Salome whispered. She recognized every word, but in the Embati's voice, they had changed from a frustrated outburst to a powerful demand. Her skin prickled. Especially after your act of courage in refusing further duties, your words struck Master Zareth deeply, said Uston. You are why he created the proposal, and why he named it for Lady Indelis. He may have put your idea into the proper language of legislation, but even then you persisted until you approved of its terms, because you understood what would benefit the ladies of the Grobel in a way he did not. Salome shook her head, amazed. Intentionally or not, Uston had just answered a question that she'd been unable to forget. So, that's why you came in, to find me while Pelly was sleeping. You wanted to talk to me about my courage. Uston looked her in the eye. Courage is like a wisp, she said. It moves through barriers. I'm sorry I couldn't move through this one, Salome sighed. The Indelis proposal has been retired. Retired, Uston agreed solemnly, with a vote of 14-1. That wasn't right, Salome frowned. No, the vote was 12-4. Uston's eyes widened. The corners of her mouth bent slightly upwards, but they didn't stop there. Her lips parted over her teeth, and she was smiling, really, truly smiling. Salome had only seen her embodied nurse escort smile once, after she'd gone to a public event at age 5 and been very, very good. Now, as then, it was puzzling and strangely exciting. Salome got to her feet. Uston, what is it? Mistress, you won. I don't understand. Of course I didn't. Respectfully, mistress, I differ. Salome stared at her. All right, Uston, explain. Uston inclined her head. Mistress, you presented yourself before the cabinet. You claimed the at-large seat. You negotiated for and won the First Family's support. You attended today's meeting, even though Grobel Palmain tried to sabotage you. And in spite of cooperation between Third and Fifth Families to stop you, you kept your seat and were permitted to vote. Uston, I have been nothing but humiliated. The heir knocked me down at the last meeting. Pelmain of the third family would have succeeded today if you hadn't stopped him. My proposal failed miserably. Mistress, a man who intended to stop a threat from a rival might hire an assassin. Gropal Pelmain only intended to throw blood on you to force you to go home and change your clothes. Her stomach lurched. Hail have mercy. I can only conclude that your fall was effective in convincing them that you do not pose a real threat. Your failure to pass the proposal today has no doubt sealed that impression. Their goal was to weaken the first family, now they believe they have succeeded. But you managed to attract 3 allies with no effort at all, and now you sit among them wielding a voice and a vote. With the grace of long practice, Ustin got to her knees and bowed her tattooed forehead all the way to the floor. Please, lady, accept my vow of service. I would be honored to continue to serve the first family's cabinet member. Salome's heart pounded. Suddenly everything looked different. Yes, she'd sponsored a proposal that had been retired. It had felt like the end, but maybe it didn't have to be. With a voice and a vote, now she could negotiate laws over years. The next time she walked into a meeting, she need not be a machine. She could be a cabinet member the same way she was a mother, falling and standing up again, yet always persisting, nurturing the future. Thank you, she said. I accept. What a strong, layered story about turning the tables in an unjust society, removing that patriarchal blanket just for a minute to allow another voice in, as hard as it may be, a much needed voice. And oh, the strife to get there. I feel for these women in this society. Their jobs given to them to protect a race so that they can retain power. Oh, stabs a sword right through my core, but I am so glad our protagonist continues to slam her foot in that door, no matter how much it hurts. What are your thoughts on the story? You can leave us a comment or a question at the Clarkesworld Magazine website itself. Thank you for listening. It's a much, much longer piece than we've done before. You guys are awesome. We have more stories for you in March, so please come back and listen again. Until then, I bid you a very fond and warm au revoir, a bientôt, aloha, adieu, and every other word that means please come back and listen again very, very soon.